If you like the story, you can support the author on Patreon. Link is in the description.
Chapter 216, Journey to the Quidditch World Cup. The morning of the Quidditch World Cup final broke over Bones Manor with a brilliance that seemed to mirror the excitement buzzing through its occupants. Harry, despite his usual composure, felt a thrill of anticipation at the prospect of witnessing world-class Quidditch action. Alongside him, Susan Bones and little Aries Black could barely contain their enthusiasm, rushing about gathering last-minute items. Wands? Omnioculars? Tent? Sirius Black's voice rang out as he strode into the room, his own excitement palpable. Harry patted his enchanted backpack, a recent gift from Emma that had quickly become indispensable. It was much more practical than his old pouch, easier to organize and retrieve items from. While the pouch was smaller and more discreet, perfect for everyday use, the backpack was ideal for occasions like this. All packed, Padfoot, Harry confirmed with a smile. Though I still think we could have just Operate. Sirius chuckled, ruffling Harry's perpetually messy hair. Ministry rules, I'm afraid. Apparition is forbidden, even for European dueling champions. His voice took on a mock-serious tone. Besides, where's the fun in that? Nothing beats a good portkaya journey to get the blood pumping. Harry rolled his eyes good-naturedly, but he understood the real reason behind the restriction: security. With 2 escaped Death Eaters still at large, the Ministry was taking no chances. Regulated travel meant controlled access points, easier to monitor and protect. They were determined not to make fools of themselves in front of the entire wizarding world. While apparition had been allowed in previous years, this time it was strictly forbidden. Amelia Bones bustled in, her usually stern face creased with a mixture of excitement and stress. Right, you lot. The portkaya is set to activate in 10 minutes. This special portkaya ensures you don't have to queue at the public ones. She turned to Sirius, her expression softening slightly. Sirius, you'll see them settled before joining me at the security checkpoint. Wouldn't miss it for the world, Sirius grinned, scooping up a giggling Aries. The little boy's laughter was infectious, lightening the mood in the room. Ready for some high-flying action, little man? As they stepped outside the manor's wards, everyone gathered around the portkaya in Old Wellington boot. Harry couldn't help but marvel at the wizarding world's penchant for turning mundane objects into magical transport. The boot began to glow blue as they all placed a finger on it. Remember, Sirius instructed, keep your finger on it no matter what. And try to land on your feet. It takes practice, but you'll get there. With a familiar, yet always unsettling, jerk behind the navel, they were whisked away. The world became a blur of color and wind, reminiscent of Harry's lightning travel but far less controlled. After what felt like both an eternity and no time at all, they landed somewhat ungracefully in a sprawling field. Welcome to the Quidditch World Cup, Sirius announced, spreading his arms wide, his voice filled with the enthusiasm of a child at Christmas. As they regained their bearings, Harry took in the scene. Witches and wizards from every corner of the globe were arriving, their excited chatter creating a cacophony of languages and dialects. Quite the international gathering, Harry remarked to Sirius. That it is, pup, Sirius replied. The World Cup brings everyone together. Soon they arrived at their destination. A small stone cottage next to a gate swam into view. Beyond it, Harry could just make out the ghostly shapes of hundreds and hundreds of tents, rising up the gentle slope of a large field toward a dark wood on the horizon. The sight was both impressive and slightly chaotic, a testament to the scale of the event. Bit of a mess, isn't it? Sirius muttered, noticing Harry's raised eyebrow. Ministry's been scrambling to find a big enough venue. Had to rent this field from the Muggles. Poor planning, if you ask me, but what can you do? His tone suggested this wasn't the first time he'd voiced such concerns. A man was standing in the doorway, looking out at the tents. Harry knew from a glance that the person was a non-magical individual. It was a confused-looking Muggle who seemed utterly overwhelmed by the strange visitors in their odd attire. Sirius approached him, paid for their spot, and added a subtle memory charm for good measure. Harry, ever analytical, couldn't help but question the setup. Why have the caretaker at all? He asked Sirius quietly as they moved away. We could have kept him away for a day and avoided much of the secrecy requirements. Sirius sighed, his expression a mix of frustration and resignation. No idea. Someone in the ministry didn't think the whole thing through. Amelia did broach the subject, but the minister wasn't listening. He thinks Amelia is after his job and doesn't want to listen to any of her suggestions. Harry's mind immediately began to analyze the implications. With the actions the minister is taking, his time in office is ticking. Does Amelia want the job? Sirius glanced around, suddenly aware of their surroundings. This isn't the place to talk about this, he said, his voice low. Let's enjoy the day and forget about other things. I also have to leave quickly. As they walked to their designated area, familiar faces began to appear in the crowd. Harry spotted several of his dueling competitors, their faces lighting up in recognition. Hogwarts classmates called out greetings, and he even noticed a group of Beauxbatons students whispering and pointing in his direction. His recent victory in the European Dueling Championship had clearly elevated his status in the international wizarding community. Harry! Harry Potter! A heavily accented voice called out. It was Viktor Volkov, the Russian duelist and Harry's final opponent in the Dueling Championship. The burly man approached with a broad smile, his hand extended in greeting. Good to see you, my friend. Ready for great match tonight? Harry shook Volkov's hand warmly, pleased to see a friendly face. Wouldn't miss it for the world. You rooting for Bulgaria? He asked, noting Volkov's attire that screamed Bulgarian fan. Viktor's chest swelled with pride. Yes. We have the greatest seeker in the world. A prodigy just like you, my young friend. Harry nodded, acknowledging the compliment while offering his own analysis. I agree he's good, but from my research, his teammates aren't quite to the same level. The Irish Chasers are going to be a real challenge for Bulgaria's defense. It'll be a good match, no doubt about it. Viktor's eyes gleamed with competitive spirit. Maybe, but Crumb will win us the game with the snitch. You'll see, Potter. It will be a match to remember. After exchanging a few more pleasantries and predictions, Harry bid farewell to Volkov and continued on to their camping spot. Setting up the tent was a quick affair with magic, though they made a show of hammering pegs and struggling with poles for the benefit of any watching muggles. There were none around, but the charade was necessary. Sirius, after all, was responsible for enforcing these somewhat absurd rules. As they stepped inside the tent, Susan and Aries gasped in awe. The interior was massive, more like a small apartment than a tent, with multiple rooms, a fully equipped kitchen, and even a small library. Right, Sirius said, checking his watch and straightening his aura robes. I've got to head back to help Amelia with security. Harry, you're in charge. His tone became serious for a moment. Keep an eye on these two, all right? And remember, constant vigilance. Harry nodded. We'll be fine, Sirius. Go save the world, or whatever it is you Aurors do. With a laugh and a final hug for Aries, Sirius ran out, leaving Harry with his younger charges. Harry turned to Susan and Aries, a mischievous glint in his eye that belied the vigilance he knew he'd need to maintain. So, who's up for exploring? Chapter 217, Encounters and Explorations. The Quidditch World Cup campsite was a vibrant tapestry of magical life, teeming with witches and wizards from every corner of the globe. As Harry, Susan, and Aries set out to explore, they found themselves immersed in a world of wonder and excitement. Tents of all shapes and sizes covered the field. Some looked normal, like regular camping tents. Others were so magical they hardly looked like tents at all. Ministry workers rushed around, trying to make the more obvious magical tents look more normal. Look at that one, Harry. Susan pointed at a tent that looked like a tiny castle, complete with towers and a moat. How is that supposed to be hidden? Harry laughed, shaking his head. It's not, which is why those poor ministry workers look so stressed. As they walked through the rows of tents, Harry thought about how silly all this secrecy was. You know, he said to Susan, they could have just sent the Muggle caretaker on a holiday. That would have been easier than all this fuss. Susan nodded thoughtfully. That does make more sense. I wonder why they didn't think of that. Who knows what goes on inside the minister's mind? Maybe he wanted the challenge. Harry replied. As they continued their exploration, familiar faces began to emerge from the crowd. Harry spotted Cedric Diggory struggling valiantly with a tent pole, his father supervising with an air of exaggerated patience. Need a hand there, said. Harry called out, approaching his friend with a grin. Cedric's face lit up with relief, his frustration evident. Harry. Thank Merlin. Dad's being all strict rule follower and wants me to put the tent up the Muggle way. I think I've tangled myself more than the tent at this point. Harry laughed, rolling up his sleeves. Well, we can't have the Hufflepuff champion defeated by a mere tent, can we? Let's show it who's boss. With Harry's help and some discreet magic applied when Cedric's father wasn't looking, the tent was soon standing proud. As they stepped back to admire their handiwork, Amos Diggory approached, his chest puffed out with pride. "Well done, boys!" he exclaimed, clapping them both on the back. "Cedric, my boy, I knew you'd get the hang of it eventually. And Harry Potter. It's a pleasure to finally meet you in person. Cedric's told us so much about you." Harry smiled politely, extending his hand. "It's nice to meet you too, Mr. Diggory. Cedric's a good friend." Amos beamed, shaking Harry's hand enthusiastically. "European dueling champion, eh? Quite the young prodigy you are. Of course, our seed's no slouch either. Won the Quidditch Cup for Hufflepuff last year, you know. First time in ages." Cedric's cheeks reddened slightly. "Dad, Harry's brilliant at Quidditch too. He just doesn't have the time with all his other commitments. If he played, Ravenclaw might well have taken the cup." Amos waved his hand dismissively. "Maybe so, but you're the one with the trophy, aren't you? Always modest, said, always the gentleman. But results are what matter in the end. I'm sure Harry would agree, wouldn't you?" Harry, seeing Cedric was uncomfortable, tried to be polite. "Every win is worth celebrating," he said. "Cedric's a great player and a good friend. Hufflepuff is lucky to have him." Seizing the opportunity to change the subject, Harry excused himself, citing Susan and Aries' desire to continue exploring. As they moved away, he could hear Amos launching into another story about Cedric's achievements to one of his friends. They walked past many stalls selling magical souvenirs and treats. Aries loved the fizzing whizbees that made you float, while Susan was amazed by a tiny model of the Quidditch stadium. Suddenly, Susan tugged on Harry's sleeve. "Harry, look!" she said, pointing. "It's the green grasses." Harry was happy to see them as now there was a way to get rid of his burden. After exchanging greetings and pleasantries, Harry broached the subject of Susan and Aries accompanying the green grasses for a while, giving him the freedom to explore on his own. "That would be lovely," Mrs. Greengrass said warmly. Daphne and Astoria would be delighted to have some company their own age. With Susan and Aries happily settled with the Greengrass sisters, Harry went off on his own. His recent victory in the European Dueling Championship had opened doors, and he thought it would be good to meet new people. As he made his way around the campsite, Harry found himself invited into numerous tents for chats and introductions. He met witches and wizards from all over Europe, each eager to make the acquaintance of the young dueling champion. While he had hoped to meet more people from outside Europe, the conversations were nonetheless fascinating. As the afternoon wore on, Harry found himself engaged in discussions ranging from the intricacies of transfiguration theory to the finer points of international magical law. He especially enjoyed talking to some students from Koldovstoritz, the Russian wizarding school. Their way of schooling was a lot different from the European style, and it was quite odd that they played Quidditch on entire, uprooted trees instead of broomsticks. As the sun began to dip towards the horizon, Harry made his way back to the green grass tent to collect Susan and Aries. He found them engrossed in an animated game of Exploding Snap with Daphne and Astoria, their laughter ringing out over the general hubbub of the campsite. "Having fun?" he asked, smiling at their excitement. Susan beamed up at him, her face smudged with soot from a particularly enthusiastic explosion. "It's brilliant, Harry. Can we stay longer?" "You can stay until it's time for the match," Harry said. "I'm going to explore a bit more with my friends, but I'll come back for you before we head to the stadium." With Susan and Aries happily occupied, Harry met up with his friends Cedric, Roger, and the others and set off to explore the various stalls and attractions that had sprung up around the campsite. The air smelled of delicious magical treats, and people were chatting excitedly in many languages. As they browsed through stalls selling everything from animated figurines of the players to enchanted binoculars, Harry spotted a familiar, portly figure making his way through the crowd. "Step right up, place your bets," Ludo Bagman called out, his boyish face alight with excitement. "Who will win? Bulgaria or Ireland? Care to wager, Mr. Potter?" Harry politely declined, remembering all too well the trouble Bagman's gambling had caused in the canon world. As Bagman moved on to find more willing participants, Harry turned to his friends. "It's almost time," he said, noting the darkening sky and the increasing flow of people towards the stadium. "We should head back and get ready for the match." As they made their way back to their respective tents, the excitement in the air was palpable. Fans decked out in team colors chanted and sang, waving flags and banners with abandon. All pretense of secrecy seemed to have been abandoned, much to the chagrin of the harried ministry officials trying to maintain order. Back at their own tent, Harry, Susan, and Aries waited for Sirius and Amelia to return and escort them to the stadium. While the anticipation for the match was building, Harry couldn't help but feel a little worried. He knew what was likely to come after the game, but found himself in the frustrating position of being unable to warn anyone without revealing knowledge he shouldn't possess. As the sky darkened and the distant roar of the gathering crowd grew louder, Harry decided to go with the flow. He pushed his worries to the back of his mind, focusing instead on the excitement building around him. The Quidditch World Cup was about to begin, and it was time to have some fun first. Chapter 218, The Quidditch World Cup Final. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the campsite, Amelia and Sirius returned to fetch Harry, Susan, and Aries for the match. The excitement in the camping grounds was palpable, with witches and wizards rushing to the stadium, their faces alight with anticipation. Ready for the show of a lifetime. Sirius grinned, scooping up an eager Aries. His eyes sparkled with boyish enthusiasm, a welcome contrast to the serious aura he'd been all day. They set off along a lantern-lit trail through the woods, joining the throng of spectators making their way to the stadium. The walk took about 20 minutes, filled with excited chatter and speculation about the upcoming match. As they emerged from the woods, Harry's breath caught in his throat. Before them stood a colossal stadium, its walls gleaming gold in the fading daylight. It was a magnificent sight, dwarfing anything Harry had seen before. The books truly did not do justice to how grand the stadium was. Merlin's beard, Susan whispered, her eyes wide with awe. It's incredible. Sirius chuckled at their reactions, his pride in the wizarding world's achievements evident. Seats 100,000, he explained. A ministry task force of 500 has been working on it all year. Muggle-repelling charms on every inch of it. Cost a fortune, but worth every galleon, I'd say. At the entrance, Amelia presented their tickets for the top box. Harry couldn't help but feel a twinge of amusement as they began the long climb up the purple-carpeted stairs. Even with all the magic at their disposal, some things remained stubbornly mundane in the wizarding world. As they neared the top, a commotion caught their attention. Amelia and Sirius exchanged a look before moving to investigate, Harry and the children following closely behind. They arrived to find the Malfoy, Weasley, and Potter families engaged in a heated exchange. Ron Weasley's voice carried over the crowd, "Hey Malfoy, our seats are in the top box. Where are yours?" Harry watched as Draco Malfoy's face flushed with embarrassment. It was clear the Malfoys' financial troubles had affected even this grand outing. Lucius Malfoy, his face a mask of disdain, sneered at Arthur Weasley, "Good Lord, Arthur. What did you have to sell to get seats in the top box? Surely your house wouldn't have fetched this much." Mr. Weasley's retort was sharp, his usually kind face hardened with anger. "Nothing. It pays to have good friends. You know what friends are, right?" The exchange quickly devolved into thinly veiled threats and accusations. Mr. Malfoy's voice dripped with venom. "Is that what you call selling favors now? Friends? I know how you got the seats from Bagman, Weasley. You want me to ask the Ministry to investigate you?" Mr. Weasley's face reddened, his hands clenching into fists. James Potter stepped in, his voice calm but laced with menace. "Investigations can go both ways, Malfoy. Do you want the Aurors at your manor tomorrow?" Harry watched with amusement as the tension escalated until the Malfoys finally retreated to their seats, Lucius's face a mask of barely contained fury. As the crowd dispersed, Sirius turned to Amelia with a grin. "Well, that was something. Looks like bad days for Malfoy. He couldn't even use favors to the minister to get top seats. Poor Lucius and cousin Narcissa." Amelia shot him a reproachful look. "Don't talk like that, Padfoot. As if you and Arcturus weren't responsible for most of their problems and their current situation." Sirius's grin widened. "Amy, don't say you don't like watching Lucius Malfoy like this. I remember he was the one who annoyed you the most in the ministry." Amelia sighed, checking her watch. "We don't have much time. The match is about to start, and we have to go." They rushed to their seats in the top box, where about 20 purple and gilt chairs stood in 2 rows. The Weasleys and Potters were already seated, which Harry's group pointedly ignored. Sirius and Amelia, after ensuring Harry, Susan, and Aries were settled, bid a hasty goodbye to return to their security posts. As Harry took in the view of the stadium, he felt a sense of awe wash over him. 100,000 witches and wizards filled the stands, which rose in levels around the long oval field. Everything was bathed in a mysterious golden light that seemed to emanate from the stadium itself. The field looked smooth as velvet from their lofty position, with 3 50-foot-high goal hoops at either end. Opposite them, a gigantic blackboard flashed advertisements across the field, gold writing appearing and disappearing as if written by an invisible hand. It was the first time Harry had seen these kinds of adverts in the wizarding world, and he couldn't help but marvel at the blend of magic and commerce. Harry met the Minister of Magic, Fudge, but there was no greeting. Both Harry and Fudge remembered their last meeting where Fudge had tried to get Harry arrested on suspicion of killing Bellatrix Lestrange. There was no chance of friendship between them, even though Fudge regretted his moves after seeing Harry become the European dueling champion. He could have used Harry's popularity in his re-election campaign, a fact that clearly grated on the minister. Harry's attention was quickly drawn to a house elf wearing a tea towel draped like a toga, sitting in one of the seats with her hands covering her eyes. He recognized her as Winky and noticed Charles and his friends talking to her. But Harry's focus was on the seemingly empty seat next to the elf. He knew Barty Crouch Jr. was hidden there under an invisibility cloak, but he resisted the urge to act. Exposing Crouch now would leave Harry blind to Voldemort's plans for resurrection. It was a calculated risk, but one Harry felt necessary to maintain some control over the coming events. Harry knew it would not be easy to kill Voldemort. Just last week, Harry had visited the Riddle House in Little Hangleton to see if the baby Voldemort was there so he could end everything before it started but did not find anything. The Riddles had been murdered, as had their caretaker Frank, so Voldemort had been there, but he and Pettigrew had left for a safer location. Harry assumed they would not be back until maybe the third Triwizard task for the ritual. His thoughts were interrupted as Ludo Bagman's magically amplified voice boomed through the stadium. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. Welcome to the final of the 422nd Quidditch World Cup." The mascots were introduced, first the alluring Vila for Bulgaria, then the mischievous leprechauns for Ireland. Harry watched with amusement as many of the males in the top box, including Charles and Ron, nearly jumped out of their seats at the Vila's dance. The leprechauns had the ignorant people scavenging for the fake gold. It was a funny start to the match, highlighting the magical world's capacity for both beauty and mischief. As the match began, Harry found himself swept up in the excitement. The Irish team's skill and teamwork were truly impressive, dominating the field and taking the score to 170-10. The final was one-sided, but that did not reduce the excitement for it. There were also many amusing incidents between the referee and the team mascots to give the audience a show. The Bulgarian team was disappointing, though. It looked like Bulgaria had reached the final only because Crumb caught the snitch before the other teams could destroy their defense. It was quite apparent to everyone watching. The match was exciting till the end, with the chase for the snitch attracting everyone's attention. Crumb showed why he was considered the best seeker in the world as he skillfully chased after the tiny gold ball. Crumb's capture of the snitch for Bulgaria provided a thrilling end to the match, even as Ireland clinched the victory. "Ireland wins!" Bagman shouted, his voice carrying over the roar of the crowd. "Crumb gets the snitch but Ireland wins, good lord, I don't think any of us were expecting that." As the prizes were distributed, Harry noticed Fred and George Weasley celebrating exuberantly. Harry knew what was going to happen next. Feeling sorry for their counterparts in the canon and taking into consideration that they had been behaving decently these past few years at Hogwarts, Harry decided to help them a little. "Hey twins, why is your celebration over the top? It's not the English team that won," he asked, approaching them casually. Fred grinned widely, his freckled face alight with joy. "Hey Harry, we're not celebrating that. We're celebrating our bet." George chimed in, his excitement palpable. "We bet with Mr. Bagman that Ireland would win but Crumb would get the snitch. Got great odds. We're going to be rich." Harry's face grew serious, and he lowered his voice. "Well, congratulations. A word of advice though, if you bet with Bagman, be very careful. I saw him pocket some leprechaun gold during the Irish mascots celebrations earlier. Just be careful he doesn't hand you those. Have your father test your winnings." The twins' faces fell slightly at this news, but they quickly rallied, thanking Harry profusely before rushing off to find their father. Harry watched them go, hoping he'd managed to avert Bagman scamming the twins of their life savings. As the excitement of the match began to die down, Harry settled in to wait for Sirius and Amelia's return. The night was young, and Harry knew the excitement of the evening was far from over. He could feel a tension in the air, a premonition of the chaos to come. Chapter 219, The Unexpected Arsenal. As the excitement of the Quidditch World Cup final began to wane, Sirius returned to escort Harry and the children back to their tent. He was in a rush, just like he'd been all day. Harry could tell the Aurors were really short-handed. He figured it was probably because of Death Eaters in the Ministry making sure the Department of Magical Law Enforcement remained underfunded. Once inside the relative privacy of their magical tent, Harry turned to his godfather, his expression grave. "Sirius, I need to tell you something. I have a feeling, something bad is going to happen here tonight. This is not a joke. I'm very serious." Sirius's jovial post-match mood sobered immediately. "What kind of feeling, Harry? What do you think is going to happen?" Harry replied, choosing his words carefully. "I'm not sure exactly, but my instincts are rarely wrong. I think we should send Susan and Aries home now, just to be safe. I'll stay behind to help if anything goes wrong. You might need my help." Sirius considered Harry's words, his brow furrowed in concern. "If you're that worried, pup, let's take them to safety. There's more harm than good in staying at this point. However, not just the kids, you will also leave together. The Aurors can handle any trouble that comes, we don't need your help." "No," Harry insisted, his voice firm. "I need to stay. If the Death Eaters are planning something, I want to be here to help stop them. Every dark wizard we can catch now is one less problem when Voldemort returns." Sirius's face hardened. "Absolutely not, Harry. Even if you are powerful, it's not your job to protect people from dark wizards. That's what Aurors are for. I won't have you putting yourself in danger like you did at Hogwarts. But the Aurors are outnumbered and underprepared," Harry argued, frustration creeping into his voice. "I've seen the Aurors you have now. They're not skilled enough. Without me, even if you stop the attack, the Death Eaters will just get away. I want them in Azkaban." Sirius sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Even if we might fail, I won't let you get involved. It's complicated, Harry. You don't have the legal right to enforce the law, and the Death Eaters are mostly from powerful pureblood families. They'd try to get you arrested if you did anything." Harry, not willing to give up, proposed, "I can disguise myself. You know, as a metamorphmagus, no one will recognize me when I disguise myself. You can say I was a foreign Auror here to watch some Quidditch." Sirius still disagreed, not wanting Harry to take the risk. Their argument escalated, neither was willing to back down. Amelia's arrival only strengthened Sirius's position. "Harry," she said firmly, "it's mine and my department's job to protect people against dark wizards. Your job is to be a student and enjoy your time at school. Leave the fighting to us." In the end, Harry found himself outvoted and outmaneuvered. With a heavy heart, he helped pack up their belongings, his mind racing with the potential consequences of his forced departure. As they prepared to leave, Harry managed to pull aside some of his friends and the Greengrass family, quietly warning them of his suspicions. To his relief, they took his words seriously, many deciding to leave early as well. Harry's friends didn't hesitate, asking their parents to pack up and leave with Harry. They trusted Harry's instincts, having seen many of his predictions come true at Hogwarts. While Amelia stayed behind to handle security and make plans, Sirius accompanied Harry and the kids home. It was mostly to ensure Harry really reached home and did not secretly stay behind. The group used the return portkey to London and from there split up to their respective homes. Everyone felt tense, knowing that if Harry was right, they'd just escaped with their lives. Back at Bones Manor, Sirius fixed Harry with a stern look. "I mean it, Harry. No sneaking out tonight. Promise me you'll stay here." Harry grudgingly agreed, but as soon as Sirius disapparated, his frustration boiled over. He had made a mistake in telling Sirius everything, he realized. If he had kept quiet, he could have joined the defense when the attack happened, and there would have been nothing Sirius or Amelia could have done to stop him. After ensuring Susan and Aries were safely in bed, Harry made his decision. He couldn't sit idly by while Death Eaters were out in the open attacking people at the Quidditch World Cup. Tonight was a good time to kill or at the very least send some Death Eaters to Azkaban. The Death Eaters were weak at the moment, and taking them out now was easier than when Voldemort returned. Harry decided to act in secret. The problem was that Sirius and Amelia knew most of his usual tricks. If he wanted to fight the Death Eaters without them finding out, he'd have to do something they wouldn't expect. Luckily, Harry had just the thing in mind. With the plan ready, Harry retreated to his room, casting powerful wards to make it appear he was sleeping soundly, then silently slipped out of the manor. Before leaving, he found a tracking spell on himself. Knowing Sirius probably put it there to keep track of him, Harry moved the spell to his bed. With his skills in charms, Sirius would never know about the shift. Harry's current destination was, of course, his personal home gifted by his grandmother in the remote hills. That place was now very heavily warded, thanks to it being Harry's test dummy where he practiced his warding skills, and only he could access it. Inside the library in that house, Harry revealed a hidden compartment with a wave of his wand. The sight that greeted him was far from magical, an arsenal of Muggle weapons, from handguns to assault rifles, even a sniper rifle. It was like something out of a spy movie. Harry thought it was cool to have such a compartment in his house. The guns were Harry's secret hobby, born from memories of his past life where, influenced by movies, Harry wanted to have a go at them. Although guns were strictly controlled in England, it was not much trouble to get them for a wizard. When he got his Thunderbird animagus about a year back, as soon as he was comfortable flying long distances, the first thing he did was go into Africa and loot the weapon storage facility of an African warlord. It had been quite easy as there were not many protections, and he just used his invisibility cloak to go in and out without anyone noticing. His harvest had been a couple of AK-47s, a few 9mm handguns, and an AWM sniper with a lot of spare bullets. There were also some special knives that he pocketed along the way. Harry did not get these weapons to fight but to learn how to use them and learn about their power. He knew there was a high chance he would go against these weapons in the future when the magical world was revealed and a war began. It was a good idea to learn more about them beforehand. Harry had been training with these weapons this summer, and he was increasing his proficiency with them at a decent rate. He hadn't tried the sniper rifle yet, though. Harry had never thought he'd use these skills in a real fight, but tonight gave him a good opportunity. As he looked at his weapons, a plan formed in Harry's mind. He couldn't use magic tonight without risking getting caught, but these Muggle weapons, they were a way to help without leaving any magical traces. Even Sirius and Amelia knew nothing about them. Time to show the Death Eaters why they shouldn't underestimate Muggles, Harry muttered, selecting an AK-47 and several handguns. He donned his armor and changed clothes, then altered his face with his partial metamorphagus ability. A few disguise charms later, he was a completely different person. As he prepared to return to the campsite, Harry was excited. This wasn't how he had envisioned the night unfolding, but he was determined to participate. The Death Eaters were in for a surprise, and Harry was ready to show them a side of combat they had likely never encountered before. With a final check of his equipment, Harry stepped out into the night. The Quidditch World Cup campsite awaited. Chapter 220, A Night of Reckoning. Back at the Quidditch World Cup campgrounds, a festive atmosphere reigned. Most people were oblivious to the danger lurking in the shadows, celebrating Ireland's win with fireworks, parties, and plenty of drinking. This joyous scene was a stark contrast to the tension building in the temporary Auror headquarters. Sirius and Amelia had gathered what few Aurors they could, their faces grim as they discussed potential threats. "It's not enough," Sirius muttered, running a hand through his hair. "If there's a real attack, we're in trouble." Amelia nodded, her face tight with worry. "I know. But we need Aurors to protect other areas like the Ministry and Diagon Alley. We're spread too thin." Their discussion was interrupted by the arrival of a silvery patroness, its message urgent: St. Mungo's was under attack. Sirius thought this might be a diversion, but the dilemma was clear on Amelia's face: stay for a potential threat or respond to a confirmed one. "Go," Sirius urged. "I'll handle things here if anything happens." With a reluctant nod, Amelia left with a group of Aurors, leaving Sirius with a skeleton crew to defend the campgrounds from what could be a real Death Eater attack. On the outskirts of the camp, a different scene was unfolding. 5 figures in black cloaks and silver masks stood before the Roberts family cottage, their intentions sinister. Mr. Roberts was the site's Muggle manager. "Is this really necessary?" one Death Eater whispered, fear evident in his voice. "If we get caught, the imperious excuse won't work this time." "It is," another replied firmly. "We must remind the wizarding world why we were feared. It's time to revive their nightmares about us." A third Death Eater chimed in, "Reckon the Dark Lord'll be back soon. We've betrayed him, but we can show we're still loyal tonight. We've been working to weaken the Ministry and Aurors for years. Time to see if it paid off." Their debate was cut short by an impatient member. Enough yappin'. I'm itchin' for some action. Let's put these muggles in their place. The nerve of the ministry, lettin' muggles at the World Cup. This fella had the gall to charge me for puttin' up a tent. Been steamed about it all day. The Death Eaters cast a spell, and the cottage door exploded inward. Mr. Roberts came out, waving a stick in a sad attempt at defense. He always used it to scare off troublemakers. He did not have a gun license. Who are you lot? Why'd you blow up my cabin with fireworks? Clear off, or I'm callin' the police. He shouted, his voice shaking. Their outfits looked mighty scary. One Death Eater sneered, a mere muggle threatenin' us. Just kill him and the others inside. Another disagreed, nah, don't kill him. Been years since we had some fun. Let's enjoy the night. A Death Eater raised his wand, a nasty curse ready, but it never came. Instead, a loud crack split the air, and the Death Eater dropped to the ground. His friends were confused, but Mr. Roberts knew that the sound was a gunshot and got even more scared. He didn't want to be in the middle of what looked like some weird gang fight. The dark-robed figures were all mixed up as someone new showed up. A big, muscular fella wearing a cowboy hat walked up to Mr. Roberts, carrying an AK-47. Howdy there, Mr. Roberts, the newcomer drawled in a thick and funny American accent. Sorry, I'm late. Name's Colton. Headquarters sent me to keep an eye on you and your kin. Said something fishy was goin' on round these parts. Mr. Roberts, wide-eyed, stammered, that's good. But did you just kill that person? Colton shrugged nonchalantly. Yep. My gut told me he was bad news. Don't know how, but I trust my instincts. Talking risks ain't my style, so I just put him down. The Death Eaters, caught off guard by this unexpected development, struggled to comprehend what was happening. Their confusion quickly turned to rage as they realized one of their own had fallen. He's dead. The filthy muggle killed him. One yelled. How in Merlin's name? I didn't see any spell. Did he do it with that muggle contraption? Another wondered. Before they could get their act together, Colton, who was, of course, Harry in disguise, spoke up. Now, y'all listen here. I'm gonna have to warn you to vamoose, or you'll be joinin' your buddy down there. It's a legal requirement, don't ya know? By the way, which Satan-worshipping cult do y'all belong to? Thought that this kinda thing only happened back in the States. Seen these get UPS there a few times. A Death Eater snarled, this muggle is infuriating. Kill him. Colton sighed, well, can't say I didn't warn ye. And opened fire again. Another Death Eater bit the dust. Panic set in among the remaining attackers as the night air filled with the sound of gunfire. Harry systematically took down the Death Eaters, who were too stunned to react effectively, their wands useless against the speed and unfamiliarity of bullets. The lack of magical flashes kept the rest of the campground in the dark about the deadly showdown happening on its edges. They figured the bangs were just some weird fireworks. As the last Death Eater fell, Mr. Roberts emerged from his hiding place, shaking. Is this legal? Won't you get in trouble? Harry, maintaining his funny American persona, reassured him. Don't you worry about that. These boys were dressed for no good, and we were outnumbered. The threat was big enough to call this self-defense. Anyhow, if trouble comes knockin', headquarters'll handle it. Wouldn't be the first time. Now, let's get you and your family somewhere safe. Don't know if the folks in their camp are part of the same outfit. I ain't got enough bullets for all of 'em if they are. Your safety's my #1 priority. Quickly, Harry ushered the Roberts family into their van and sent them away from the campsite. Once they were gone, he turned his attention to covering his tracks. With some subtle wandless magic, he got rid of any signs of bullets and gunpowder, aiming to throw off any magical investigation. As he surveyed the scene of his handiwork, Harry felt a mix of satisfaction and unease. He had eliminated a significant threat, but at what cost? The ease with which he had taken lives, even those of Death Eaters, weighed heavily on him. However, Harry reminded himself of the atrocities these men had committed and would continue to commit if left unchecked. Reminding himself that this was a necessary evil made it easier to swallow. Shaking off these thoughts, Harry turned back towards the campground. His night wasn't over yet, there might be more Death Eaters to deal with, more innocent lives to protect. Chapter 221, Night of the Silent Blade. The campgrounds of the Quidditch World Cup had transformed from a scene of celebration to one of chaos and terror. Screams pierced the night air, accompanied by the crackle of flames and the sinister flashes of dark magic. Amidst this mayhem, a figure moved with deadly purpose. Harry, now in a new disguise, was clad entirely in black with a ninja-like mask obscuring his features. His eyes, magically altered to a deep, unsettling red, surveyed the scene with cold calculation. The disguise was chilling, designed for stealth as well as to strike fear into the hearts of his enemies. He moved with his supernatural speed and silence, avoiding the areas where Aurors were actively engaging Death Eaters. His targets were the outskirts, where screams echoed but no magical combat flashed, the places where the truly vulnerable were suffering. In his hand, a short sword gleamed, ready to spill the blood of Death Eaters. His first encounter came swiftly. A masked Death Eater stood before a burning tent, laughing as screams emanated from within. "Please! There are children inside!" A woman's voice cried out desperately. The Death Eater cackled. "Music to my ears, blood traitor! Burn!" Harry approached from behind, his footsteps masked by the crackling flames. Without hesitation, he struck. The short sword flashed in the firelight, slicing through the Death Eater's neck with surgical precision. The laughter cut short in a gurgle of blood as the body crumpled to the ground. Harry quickly slashed open the tent, allowing the terrified occupants to escape. A young couple clutching two small children rushed out, their eyes wide with fear and gratitude. "Thank you," the mother whispered, "whoever you are." Harry nodded silently, motioning for them to run. He wanted to use magic to douse the flames but restrained himself, knowing any trace of magic could lead the investigation back to him. Moving on, Harry continued his silent patrol. As he navigated the chaotic campground, he encountered more than just Death Eaters. The destruction had left many innocent campers trapped and in danger. Approaching a collapsed tent, Harry heard muffled cries for help. Without hesitation, he began to lift the heavy canvas and broken poles. Soon he had the tent back up, and the occupants were able to crawl out safely. Their eyes widened at the sight of his intimidating appearance, but gratitude quickly overcame fear. "Thank you," the father said, clutching his children close. "We thought we were done for." Harry nodded silently, pointing them towards safety before moving on. As he continued his hunt, Harry encountered more scenes of destruction. He helped as many people as he could without using any magic, all the while making his way towards the next Death Eater. Minutes later, he encountered a Death Eater gleefully torturing victims. The masked figure was so engrossed in his cruel act that he never sensed Harry's approach. With a swift, fluid motion, Harry's blade found its mark, piercing the Death Eater's back and emerging through his chest. The victims, wide-eyed and trembling, watched their tormentor fall. A quick assessment of the victims showed they needed no immediate medical attention, so Harry pressed forward. Harry's next confrontation pitted him against two Death Eaters who had just overpowered some ordinary wizards. He approached silently, using the chaos around them as cover. "Look at them squirm!" One Death Eater laughed. "Like insects under a magnifying glass." "Indeed," the other replied. "Shall we finish them off?" The first fell to Harry's blade before he could even register the new threat, a quick slash across the throat silencing him forever. The second managed to turn, wand raised. "Who? What?" he stammered, but Harry gave him no time to finish. In one fluid motion, he drew a throwing knife from his belt and sent it spinning through the air. The blade found its mark in the Death Eater's neck, and he fell, choking on his own blood. As Harry retrieved his weapons, wiping them clean on the fallen Death Eater's robes, he heard approaching footsteps. Sirius's voice rang out, "Put the knife down and surrender, or we'll be forced to attack. Whoever you are, you acted bravely, and I promise to give you a fair trial and help you." Harry, deciding to add a theatrical touch to his escape, produced a homemade smoke bomb. It was a simple device made from flour, talcum powder, and a few other household ingredients, originally intended for pranks but now serving a different purpose. Sirius, his wand trained on Harry, called out again, "What is that? Put it down, or we will attack. This is your last warning." As Sirius issued his final warning, the sky suddenly lit up with an eerie green glow. A colossal skull, comprised of what looked like emerald stars, with a serpent protruding from its mouth like a tongue, appeared in the sky, the dark mark, symbol of the Death Eaters. Harry knew this was the work of Barty Crouch Jr., signaling the end of the night's carnage. "Merlin's beard!" Sirius exclaimed. The dark mark. Seizing the moment of distraction, Harry detonated his smoke bomb. The air filled with a thick white powder, obscuring vision and causing confusion. What in the name of? Sirius coughed, his words cut off by the choking smoke. In the chaos, Harry donned his invisibility cloak, vanishing like a spectre into the night. Sirius's confused shout faded as Harry made his escape, first to his hidden sanctuary to dispose of his weapons and disguise, then back to his room at Bones Manor. As he settled into meditation to calm his racing thoughts, Harry reflected on the night's events. He had taken 9 lives, all Death Eaters, but lives nonetheless. The ease with which he had done so disturbed him, yet he felt no overwhelming remorse. These were not innocent people but willing participants in acts of cruelty and terror. Still, the weight of his actions settled heavily upon him. As he centered himself, preparing for the inevitable questions from Sirius and Amelia upon their return, Harry couldn't help but ponder the path he was treading. He had acted as judge, jury, and executioner tonight, a role he had never anticipated for himself. Yet in such a world and in the face of such evil, what choice did he have? It was either kill or be killed. The wizarding justice system for purebloods was so weak that Harry knew the Death Eaters would be back to their usual acts if he had just subdued them for the Aurors. Although Harry had eliminated 9 Death Eaters, he was not entirely satisfied. Those he had killed were likely low-level members, cannon fodder in the grand scheme of things. But their absence would be felt, their loss a blow to Voldemort's forces, however small. As dawn approached and Harry lay in his bed reflecting on the night's events, the faces of those he had saved flashed through his mind alongside the Death Eaters he had killed. The contrast was stark, the terror of the innocent versus the cruelty of the attackers. It reinforced his conviction that his actions, though dark, were necessary. Harry had crossed a line tonight, one that could never be uncrossed. He was no longer light but had become a shade of grey. However, Harry knew it was necessary. This war with Voldemort would not be the only conflict he would face. There would be more in the future, and if he behaved like the light side, giving second chances over and over again, he would face endless troubles. As the first rays of sunlight crept through his window, Harry steeled himself for the day ahead. The sound of the front door opening downstairs jolted Harry from his thoughts. Sirius and Amelia were back. Taking a deep breath, Harry prepared himself for the inevitable questioning. He had his story straight, he had been here all night, safe and sound, just as they had insisted. Time to act, Harry muttered, sitting up in bed. Let the show begin. Chapter 222, Echoes of the Night. The early morning sunlight streamed through Harry's window as he heard the front door of Bones Manor open. Footsteps thundered up the stairs, and moments later, Sirius burst into the room, his face a mixture of relief and concern. Before Sirius could speak, Harry, sitting up in bed, asked bluntly, "How high is the death count?" Sirius blinked, momentarily thrown off balance. "What?" Harry pressed on, his voice steady. "The death count from last night's attack. From your expression and appearance, I can tell there was an attack. How many people died?" Sirius ran a hand through his disheveled hair. "No one died. Just some injuries that can be healed in no time." "What?" Harry exclaimed, feigning surprise. "No one died? Did I underestimate your aura department? I was sure the death count would be high. So, did you capture any Death Eaters? Are they on their way to Azkaban?" Amelia entered the room, her face grim. "No, we didn't capture any Death Eaters last night." Harry's eyes narrowed. "I knew it. I should have been there. I would have ensured the Death Eaters never went back home and spent the night in an aura trial cell." Amelia fixed Harry with a penetrating stare. "Harry, where were you last night?" "At home, just where Sirius left me," Harry replied, confusion coloring his voice. "Why?" Sirius exchanged a glance with Amelia before speaking. "Someone intervened last night. They fought against the Death Eaters. It would have been okay if they'd used less lethal measures, but now we have 9 Death Eater bodies. 9 pure bloods." Harry's eyes widened. "Really? Well, at least someone had the courage to do what I've always wanted to. But why are you telling me this? You don't think it was me, do you?" He paused, then added wistfully, "I wish it was me. Unfortunately, I don't have the courage to kill people yet. Otherwise, I will be out at night hunting Death Eaters in my free time." Amelia's voice was stern. "That's not a good thought to have, Harry. We don't have the right to take people's lives. You should never do that, even during wars. Harry shrugged. Whatever. I've always believed a dead terrorist is the best terrorist. So, what did this person look like? Sirius described the mysterious figure, and Harry's face lit up with excitement. Wow! Did you really see a ninja last night? I didn't know ninjas invaded the wizarding world. I thought they didn't exist anymore. Or maybe they do in Japan. What are ninjas? Sirius asked, bewildered. Harry launched into an enthusiastic explanation, his eyes shining with apparent admiration. They're special forces from Japan. I've seen many movies with them but never in real life. You're so lucky. I want to meet the ninja. Maybe he could teach me some tricks. Sirius chuckled, despite the seriousness of the situation. I've never seen you like this, Harry. You a fan of ninjas? Harry grinned. You will be too once you've seen some movies. I'll show them when we have time. Amelia cleared her throat. I hate to interrupt, but we need to get back on topic. I don't have much time. I have to deal with the fallout. So Harry, you suspect someone from the Muggle world was involved in last night's attack? Harry pondered for a moment. Maybe, or some Muggle born out for revenge against Death Eaters for something that happened in the last war, went to the Muggle world, found ninjas, learned the art, and came back for revenge. I'd put my bet on the latter. I don't think Muggles, if they did intervene in the wizarding world, would do it alone. They'd come in groups. Sirius nodded thoughtfully. Good guess, but this clue is of no use. We can't use it to track down the Muggleborns. Many of them have left Wizarding Britain and have either joined other countries or gone back to the Muggle world. Fewer opportunities for them here. Harry leaned forward. I say we leave him alone. It's the Death Eaters he's after, which I fully support. I don't want to antagonize him and make him go after other purebloods. That would be bad for the wizarding world. Ninjas are known for stealth, and it will be very hard to find them. Amelia sighed. Harry, write down what you know about ninjas and send it to me later. I'll investigate in that direction. I have to leave now. I just wanted to confirm you weren't involved in last night's events. As they prepared to leave, Sirius turned back. Harry, you weren't involved, right? There are suspicions about another person who killed Death Eaters who went after the Muggle family on the grounds. Harry met his godfather's gaze steadily. No, I wasn't involved. You can investigate without worry. I was here at home. After Amelia and Sirius left, Harry allowed himself a small smile of satisfaction. He had successfully misdirected their suspicions and planted the idea of ninja involvement. Now, he turned his attention to the aftermath. He waited for the Daily Prophet to arrive, eager to see the repercussions of the night's events. He was particularly interested in seeing if there were any notable names among the Death Eaters he had killed. He was also relieved that no one except the Death Eaters had been killed, knowing it was largely due to his intervention. The Daily Prophet arrived, along with a flurry of letters from friends thanking Harry for his timely advice to leave early. Harry set those letters aside and turned to the paper with its wildly animated photos. As Harry unfolded the Daily Prophet, his eyes were immediately drawn to the bold headlines splashed across the front page. Terror at the Quidditch World Cup, Death Eaters strike. Beneath this, in slightly smaller text. 9 respected wizards slain, community in shock. And further down. Vigilante justice or cold-blooded murder. Pureblood lives lost to mysterious attacker. Harry's eyes scanned the articles, taking in the details of how the Daily Prophet was portraying the events. The paper was full of speculation and thinly veiled accusations against the Ministry's handling of security. As Harry read through the list of the deceased, he couldn't help but feel a grim satisfaction at seeing the Caro twins among them. Although the others were cannon fodder whom Harry had never even heard of, eliminating these two was enough to consider his last night's actions a victory. These two were some of the worst dark wizards, and Harry was glad to see them leave this world. The paper referred to all the victims as respected members of Wizarding Society, conveniently glossing over their Death Eater affiliations. The rest of the paper was filled with eyewitness accounts, statements from Ministry officials, and, of course, Rita Skeeter's wild theories about the identity of the vigilante. One of her articles boldly claimed, a rare conspiracy, Ministry covers up extrajudicial killings. So important were these articles that the Irish team's victory in the Quidditch World Cup final had been relegated to page 2. There, Harry found a small, boxed article titled Ireland Triumphs in World Cup Final, tucked away in the corner as if it were an afterthought. The following days were a whirlwind of news and speculation. The Roberts family was found, and the Aurors fruitlessly searched for the second mysterious Muggle who had intervened in the Quidditch final fiasco. Harry's theory about a group of vengeful Muggleborns gained traction. As the date for the Hogwarts Express's departure drew near, Harry resumed his usual routine, mentally preparing himself for another eventful year at school. He knew things might be very different from the canon, but he was ready to handle anything that came his way. Chapter 223, The Dark Lord's Gambit. The night air hung heavy with an eerie stillness as two figures stood before the imposing facade of Crouch Manor. One, a small, misshapen creature cradled in the arms of a nervous, rat-faced man. Wormtail, carefully holding his lord, shifted uneasily from foot to foot, his eyes darting around as if expecting an attack at any moment. "We are fortunate, Wormtail," the creature spoke, its voice a chilling whisper that seemed to freeze the very air around them. "Your capture of Bertha Hawkins has proven most fortuitous. Through her, we have learned of a faithful servant, one who still lives." Pettigrew nodded, his voice quavering. "Yes, my lord. But, are you certain he will still be loyal after all this time?" The creature's red eyes gleamed with malevolent amusement. "We shall see. But first, tell me of the events at the Quidditch World Cup. You said something happened at the venue." Pettigrew swallowed hard. "My lord, it was a disaster. Some of your former followers attempted to show their loyalty by attacking the wizards at the final to cause fear in the wizarding world again, but they were thwarted. Many were killed by an unknown assailant." The creature that was Voldemort let out a high, cold laugh that sent shivers down Pettigrew's spine. "Killed? How delightfully unexpected. It seems the wizarding world has developed some teeth in my absence. No matter. My unfaithful followers' pathetic display only proves how desperately they need my return. Now, let's free my faithful servant from his prison." They entered the manor, finding it empty and devoid of life. Voldemort muttered an incantation, his magic pulsing through the air. "Follow my directions precisely, Wormtail. Fail me, and you will beg for the mercy of death." Their search led them to a hidden room, easily breached by Voldemort's power. Inside, they found a small chamber with a seemingly empty bed. "Remove the invisibility cloak, Wormtail," Voldemort commanded, his voice filled with anticipation. As Pettigrew obeyed, the unconscious form of Barty Crouch Jr. was revealed. With another spell from Voldemort, Jr.'s eyes fluttered open, the imperious curse lifted from his mind. "My lord!" Jr. gasped, his eyes wide with reverence and awe. "Is it truly you? After all this time?" Voldemort's lipless mouth curved into a semblance of a smile, an expression that was more terrifying than comforting. He saw no disgust in Junior's expression at seeing his current state. The boy was faithful. "Indeed, my faithful servant. You have not forgotten me, even after years of imprisonment in your own mind." "Never, my lord," Junior breathed, struggling to sit up. "I would never forsake you. I was always trying to gain freedom and go on a search for you." Voldemort turned to Pettigrew, his red eyes gleaming with cruel satisfaction. "You see, Wormtail? This is true loyalty. Barty is one of the very few faithful followers I have left." Pettigrew's face fell. "But my lord, I came to you. I've been faithful." "You came to me out of fear and a lack of options," Voldemort cut him off, his voice dripping with disdain. "You are useful, Wormtail, but do not presume to compare yourself to true devotion." He turned back to Junior. "Even my other Death Eaters have proven themselves cowards. They were quick to plead their innocence with the imperious excuse almost instantly after that night. Now they sense my growing strength through the dark mark, and their pitiful attack at the World Cup was a feeble attempt to prove their worth." Junior nodded vigorously. "They are weak, my lord. Unworthy of your greatness. When I sent up the dark mark at the Quidditch World Cup final, they fled like the cowards they are. So that was you. I loved seeing the mark in the prophet." "You did well, Barty," Voldemort praised. "Your loyalty will be rewarded beyond your wildest dreams." As they made their way to the living room, the front door opened. Barty Crouch Sr. was back home after a busy day at the ministry. He froze at the sight before him. His son was free, and Pettigrew and some weird creature were present. His hand reached for his wand. Before he could act, however, a red jet of light from Pettigrew's wand struck him, and he crumpled to the floor. "Well done, Wormtail," Voldemort said, a hint of surprise in his voice. "It seems you are not entirely useless. It is good you did not kill him. He may yet prove useful in our plans." Junior turned to his master eagerly, his eyes shining with fanatical devotion. My lord, what grand design have you conceived for your glorious return? How may I serve you? Voldemort's eyes gleamed with malevolent purpose, his voice taking on a fevered pitch. For my resurrection, I require the blood of an enemy. But not just any enemy. For reasons beyond your understanding, I need the blood of Charles Potter. His blood will remove a weakness and make me stronger than I ever was before. It shall be done, my lord, Junior declared fervently. I will deliver the boy to you, whatever the cost. I have already devised a plan, Voldemort continued, his excitement growing with each word. Hogwarts will host the Triwizard Tournament this year. We shall use this to our advantage, to lure young Potter away from Dumbledore's protection. The old fool will never see it coming until it's too late. Pettigrew, still nursing his wounds from earlier, spoke up hesitantly. My lord, is all this necessary? Surely we could obtain the boy's blood more easily. I could sneak into the hospital wing at Hogwarts and get his blood. Voldemort's eyes flashed dangerously. You dare question me, Wormtail? I want my resurrection to be a spectacle, a moment that will crush all hope from our enemies. Charles Potter is very important for that spectacle. Junior nodded vigorously. Of course, my lord. Wormtail is as cowardly as ever. It will be child's play to snatch the boy from under that old fool's nose. Pettigrew flinched. It's not Dumbledore I worry about. It's the elder Potter boy, Hadrian. Hadrian Potter? Junior asked, confused. Voldemort turned his piercing gaze on Pettigrew. Explain yourself, Wormtail. Trembling, Pettigrew recounted the tale of his escape from Azkaban with the Lestranges, their failed attempts to capture Charles, and their defeat at the hands of Harry Potter. Each revelation was met with a cruciatus curse from Voldemort, leaving Pettigrew twitching on the floor. He also mentioned the death of the Lestrange brothers from the Dementor's kiss and the missing Bellatrix. Voldemort aimed his wand at Wormtail. Crucio. Voldemort was furious. The death of the Lestrange brothers was a significant blow to his forces. The missing Bellatrix was also a cause of great concern. Not only was she his best lieutenant, but she also held something important in her custody. He needed to search for her once he had a proper body again. She safeguarded one of his most precious things, and he needed to ensure it was secure. The Potter boy defeated you four, including Bellatrix? Junior asked, incredulous. He's not ordinary, Pettigrew gasped. He's this year's European dueling champion. He defeated many people more than twice his age in the dueling arena. We were outmatched going against him. Only Bella gave him a good fight. Voldemort's eyes narrowed. Interesting. The Potter family has produced a new dueling prodigy. But it matters not. The elder Potter is not crucial to our plans. He then outlined his scheme to Junior, how he would infiltrate Hogwarts in disguise, ensure Charles Potter's entry and victory in the tournament, and use the trophy as a porte-clés to deliver the boy for the resurrection ritual. Pettigrew, still trembling, raised another objection. My lord, there's a map, it shows the true identities of everyone in the castle. Harry Potter possesses it. Voldemort's anger flared again, but he contained it, forcing Pettigrew to explain the map's creation and capabilities in detail. A complication, but not insurmountable, Voldemort mused. I can create a means to fool the map, though it will take time. Our plan may need adjustments. Your father will prove very useful and will get to live the way you have this past decade. It will be a good revenge. As the night wore on, they refined their strategy, with Voldemort dismissing any suggestions to target a different victim for the ritual. Finally, exhausted, he demanded his nourishment from Wormtail. As Voldemort drank the potion laced with Nagini's venom from a feeding bottle, his mind whirred with possibilities. The game had changed, but the Dark Lord was nothing if not adaptable. Charles Potter would be his, and with him, the key to his triumphant return. Wormtail did his best to hide his amusement at seeing the misshapen baby Voldemort, or Baby Mort, drinking from a feeding bottle and thinking seriously. It was a sight that his old friends would have found hilarious. Soon, Baby Mort hissed after finishing his drink with a loud, satisfied burp, the wizarding world will tremble at my return. They will learn the price of defying Lord Voldemort. And you, my faithful Barty, will be at my right hand when I ascend once more to power. Now, Wormtail, I require a diaper change. As Pettigrew reluctantly set about this new, horrifying task, he couldn't help but wonder if it was too late to switch sides again. Surely Azkaban couldn't be worse than this? Chapter 224, The Triwizard Tournament. The Great Hall buzzed with excitement as students filed in for the opening feast of the new term. Harry Potter, already seated at the Ravenclaw table with his friends, couldn't help but feel a sense of anticipation. The journey to the castle had been marked by a torrential downpour, but thanks to magic, they had all arrived dry and comfortable. Roger Davies, one of Harry's closest friends, leaned in with an eager grin. "So, Harry, are you ready for this year's Quidditch Cup? You promised you'd join the team, and with you on board, we're practically guaranteed the win." Harry's lips quirked into a small smile. "Actually, Roger, I hate to break it to you, but there won't be a Quidditch Cup this year." Roger's face fell. "What? Are you serious?" "No. That is my godfather." This got a glare from Roger and the nearby Reggie. Harry laughed at successfully using the overused joke. "Well, I am telling the truth. We're hosting a special tournament," Harry explained, his voice low. "I'm sure Dumbledore will announce it soon. Those dress robes on our school list? They're for this event." As if on cue, the Sorting Hat burst into its annual song, followed by the sorting of the new first years. Throughout the sorting, Harry's attention kept drifting to the staff table, particularly to the grizzled figure of Mad-Eye Moody. Something was off. In the timeline Harry remembered from the canon plot, Moody had made a dramatic entrance, interrupting the feast. But here he sat, already at the table, not dramatically swigging from a hip flask every few minutes. Harry's suspicions grew. Was this even Barty Crouch Jr. in disguise? The lack of constant drinking suggested this wasn't someone using polyjuice potion. Harry's mind raced. If this wasn't Crouch Jr., where was he? Was he not rescued by Voldemort? How would the events he remembered unfold? How would Charles's name end up in the Goblet of Fire? How would Voldemort manage to spirit Charles away for the resurrection ritual? As Harry pondered these questions, Moody's magical eye swiveled in his direction. Quickly, Harry averted his gaze, turning his attention back to his friends and the feast before him. Things were not looking good as Harry was going in blind this year. He would have to be on his toes to make and change plans according to the situation. Once the plates had been cleared and the last echoes of conversation died down, Dumbledore rose to his feet. The hall fell silent. "So," Dumbledore said, his eyes twinkling as he smiled at the sea of students before him. "Now that we are all fed and watered, I must once more ask for your attention while I give out a few notices." He proceeded with the usual start of term announcements, introducing Professor Moody as the new Defense Against the Dark Arts teacher. Then, with a slight pause for effect, he continued, "It is also my painful duty to inform you that the Inter-House Quidditch Cup will not take place this year." A chorus of protests erupted from around the hall. Harry caught Roger's eye and mouthed, "Told you so," as his friend's face fell in disappointment. Dumbledore raised his hands for silence. "This is due to an event that will be starting in October and continuing throughout the school year, taking up much of the teachers' time and energy, but I am sure you will all enjoy it immensely. I have great pleasure in announcing that this year at Hogwarts, we are to have the honor of hosting a very exciting event over the coming months, an event that has not been held for over a century. It is my very great pleasure to inform you that the Triwizard Tournament will be taking place at Hogwarts this year." "You're joking," came a loud voice from the Gryffindor table. Harry recognized it as belonging to Fred Weasley. Dumbledore chuckled. "I am not joking, Mr. Weasley, though now that you mention it, I did hear an excellent one over the summer about a troll, a hag and a leprechaun who all go into a bar." Professor McGonagall cleared her throat loudly, shooting Dumbledore a stern look. But maybe this is not the time, no." Dumbledore quickly sobered. "Where was I? Ah yes, the Triwizard Tournament." For the next several minutes, Dumbledore explained the history and nature of the Triwizard Tournament. He spoke of the three participating schools, Hogwarts, Beauxbatons, and Durmstrang, and how they would be arriving in October for the selection of champions. "The champion for each school," Dumbledore explained, his voice carrying across the silent hall, "will be chosen by an impartial judge which will be announced later. The judge will decide which students are most worthy to compete for the Triwizard Cup, the glory of their school, and 1,000 galleons personal prize money." A murmur of excitement rippled through the crowd at the mention of the 1,000 galleon prize money. Even Roger was excited, and as Harry turned towards Cedric in the distance, he could see he was excited as well. Harry, however, remained silent, his mind already planning his move forward. Harry was not worried about his other friends since there was less chance of them being selected. Cedric and Roger had changed a lot from the canon due to his influence, and there was a high chance one of them would get selected. It looked like Harry had to intervene in this tournament to ensure his friends would not be in danger and Cedric would not die like in the canon. Dumbledore then spoke again, and the hall quieted once more. Eager though I know all of you will be to bring the Triwizard Cup to Hogwarts, he said, the heads of the participating schools, along with the Ministry of Magic, have agreed to impose an age restriction on contenders this year. Only students who are of age, that is to say, 17 years or older, will be allowed to put forward their names for consideration. This Dumbledore raised his voice slightly, for several people had made noises of outrage at these words, and the Weasley twins were suddenly looking furious. Is a measure we feel is necessary, given that the tournament tasks will still be difficult and dangerous, whatever precautions we take, and it is highly unlikely that students below 6th and 7th year will be able to cope with them. I will personally be ensuring that no underage student hoodwinks our impartial judge into making them Hogwarts champion. His light blue eyes twinkled as they flickered over Fred's and George's mutinous faces. I therefore beg you not to waste your time submitting yourself if you are under 17. As Dumbledore concluded his announcement, wishing them all a good night's rest before classes began the next day, the hall erupted into a cacophony of scraping benches and excited chatter. Students began filing out, their heads filled with dreams of glory and gold. Harry caught Cedric's eye across the hall. The Hufflepuff prefect gave him a subtle nod, a signal Harry recognized immediately. Gathering Roger and Reggie, he made his way towards Cedric. They were soon joined by the rest of their group: Elvinia, Arabella, Angelina, and Alicia. Empty classroom, Cedric suggested, and the group nodded in agreement. As they filed into an unused classroom near the Great Hall, Harry's mind was already racing with plans to deal with the new unexpected developments with the missing Barty Crouch Jr. It looked like he had to change his plans regarding the Triwizard Tournament. Chapter 225, The Tournament Looms, Secrets and Strategies. Once inside the classroom, Cedric closed the door and cast a quick silencing charm. "All right," he said, turning to face the group. "I think we all know why we're here. The Triwizard Tournament, it's big news." "Understatement of the century," said, Angexlina chimed in, her eyes gleaming with excitement. 1,000 galleons prize money. Can you imagine?" Harry leaned against a desk, his expression thoughtful. "The money's nice, sure, but let's not forget this tournament is dangerous. People have died competing in it before." A hush fell over the group at Harry's words. It was Reggie who broke the silence. "You're not wrong, mate. But still, the glory of being chosen as Hogwarts champion, it's tempting, isn't it? Are any of you thinking of entering?" Alicia asked, looking around the group. Cedric nodded slowly. "I'm considering it. I mean, I'll be 17 by then, so I'm eligible." "What about you, Harry?" Roger turned to his friend. "You're the European dueling champion. If anyone has a shot at this, it's you." Harry replied, "I wasn't planning on participating, but last night I got some information which kind of forces me to enter." "What?" Elvinia's eyes widened with curiosity. Harry fabricated a story. "Well, I've known about the tournament for some time now and I've done some research on the kind of tasks. The first task usually involves magical creatures, so I had people on the lookout for information at various magical creature reserves. I got some troubling news last night. I am almost certain that the first task of the tournament deals with dragons." "Dragons?" Angelina gasped. "Fully grown dragons," Harry confirmed, "and some of the ones being used are the ferocious kind." "So what does this mean?" Roger asked, his brow furrowed. Harry took a deep breath. "I know I can't stop you from putting in your names for the Hogwarts champion selection since it involves a lot of things, but due to the danger involved, I would also be putting in my name. I'll be of age on October 12th and will be eligible to participate. If I'm selected, I'll have to worry about only my safety, but if any one of you gets selected, be ready for the cruelest training of your life. I won't have any of you injured or worse, dying in this tournament." Harry had really not planned to participate in the tournament this year. The glory and the prize weren't attractive to him. Also, with his knowledge of the plot, he had confidence in altering things appropriately and ensuring everyone's safety. He had also thought of plans to ensure Cedric's survival. However, the absence of Barty Crouch Jr. changed everything. Now that things weren't going according to the plot, to ensure nothing went wrong, he would have to enter the tournament himself. He wasn't sure he would get selected, but if the goblet chose according to strength, his selection was almost certain. Angelina sighed, well, now I really don't want to get selected, but I'll put my name in anyway. The Gryffs will want me to. There's no one else good enough in the Gryffindor house, and I don't want to disappoint them. Cedric nodded, well, I know our chances are low with Harry entering, but I'm willing to try anyway. It would be cool to be the Hogwarts champion. Harry raised an eyebrow. Cedric, I thought you wouldn't want to get selected. Why? Cedric looked confused. Harry smirked, well, if you get selected, with my training, you won't have time to go out with a certain Asian Quidditch player in my house. A chorus of what? Was shrieked by the girls in the room. Cedric spluttered, what are you talking about, Harry? Was this supposed to be a secret? Harry asked innocently. Well, the number of times you were looking at her during the feast just now, I was almost sure you wanted everyone to know. With this, Cedric was surrounded by everyone eager to get the latest gossip. Harry was glad everyone's attention was off the tournament. After some interrogations, Arabella decided to help be the matchmaker for an embarrassed Cedric. Cedric, really wanting to change subjects, asked, Harry, do you have a bad feeling about this year as you've had every year before? Harry nodded grimly, I have that feeling every year. With the Triwizard Tournament, the feeling is over the top. This year will be very dangerous, and dragons might be the least of our problems. Always the conspiracy theorist, aren't you, Potter? Elvinia teased, but there was a note of seriousness in her voice. He's usually right, though, Roger pointed out. His track record is there, and he is the star pupil of Professor Trelawney. The group fell into a contemplative silence, each lost in their own thoughts about the upcoming tournament and Harry's warning. Reggie tried to cheer everyone up. No need to worry, guys. We have the dueling champion and Dumbledore in the school with us. Problems and dangers will get solved without worries. Harry added, also, Professor Trelawney will be disappointed this year. I'm not taking her divination nude classes. Arabella looked surprised, why? I believe you have the gift of sight. No time, Harry explained. I'm planning on finishing my charms apprenticeship with Professor Flitwick before graduating from Hogwarts. Planning on increasing my workload. Roger shook his head in disbelief, where do you find all this time, Harry? I'm exhausted after the day's classes and have no energy to even pick up books after that. Harry grinned, how did you convince the hat to sort you into Ravenclaw, Roger? That's so unlike a Ravenclaw. With the cheerful banter, everyone said good night and went their separate ways. Harry was glad no one was hurt or their friendships strained due to his decision to participate in the tournament. He was already quite famous, and Harry had worried that if his friends were like Ron, they would be jealous of him trying to get more fame and it would strain their friendship. Harry was glad no one had thoughts like that. As Harry made his way to the Ravenclaw common room with Reggie and Roger, he met the Weasley twins as they turned a corner. Harry! George exclaimed, his eyes lighting up. Our esteemed benefactor! Fred added with a dramatic bow. Reggie and Roger exchanged confused glances. Harry smirked, so, Bagman tried to cheat you. Right in one, oh wise one, Fred nodded solemnly. Paid us in leprechaun gold, the scoundrel did, George added with a shake of his head. Thanks to your warning, our dear old dad checked and uncovered the dastardly deed, Fred continued. Harry raised an eyebrow, so you got your winnings. Indeed we did, George grinned. Made such a fuss, Bagman had to cough up the real galleons, Fred added with a wink. He was madder than a nest of pixies, that one, George chuckled. Harry nodded, well, best of luck for the joke shop. How do you know about our entrepreneurial endeavors, oh knowledgeable one? Fred asked, shocked. I just know, Harry replied mysteriously. George leaned in conspiratorially, so, any chance you know how two dashingly handsome, albeit underage, wizards might enter this illustrious tournament? Harry smirked, I might. But why risk your lives? You have enough to rent out a joke shop, right? Ah, but you see, dear Harry, Fred began. The more the merrier. George finished. We need the funds for our experiments, Fred explained. So, how does one go about entering? George pressed. Harry considered for a moment, I'll tell you at the time. It's a simple trick. With Harry's promise secured, Fred and George dashed off, clearly not heading in the direction of Gryffindor Tower. Harry had to fill in the confused Rocky and Roger about what had happened at the Quidditch World Cup. They were shocked that Fred and George won their huge bet. Roger later turned to Harry, curiosity burning in his eyes. "Harry, you know how the champions are going to be selected?" "Of course, I know," Harry replied with a mischievous grin. "But I won't tell you. There's more fun in keeping the secret." The disappointed Roger and Reggie followed Harry to the Ravenclaw common room. They tried to get Harry to spill the beans along the way, but Harry remained tight-lipped. There was no fun in leaking this secret. As they approached the Ravenclaw Tower, Harry's mind was already racing with plans and contingencies. The timeline was changing, and he knew he needed to be prepared for whatever challenges lay ahead. With the unexpected absence of Barty Crouch Jr., the game had changed, but Harry Potter was determined to stay one step ahead. Chapter 226, Vigilance and Timeskip. After returning to his dorm bed, Harry immediately pulled out the Marauder's map. His eyes scanned the parchment intently, searching for any sign of Barty Crouch Jr. or other unexpected presences. As he had concluded earlier, the Alastair Moody inside the castle was the real deal. There was no trace of Barty Crouch Jr. anywhere in Hogwarts. Curious, Harry muttered to himself. How would Voldemort's plans unfold without his faithful servant in place at Hogwarts? The next morning, as Harry prepared for his first day of classes, he reviewed his chosen subjects. He had decided to focus on 7 Newt-level courses: Charms, Transfiguration, Defense against the Dark Arts, Potions, Herbology, Care of Magical Creatures, and Ancient Runes. Harry had chosen to drop the 5 other courses he had passed his owls in. There was really no need to attend all the classes. Besides, he knew he could sit the other Newt exams without attending classes if he chose to later. His friends had been surprised by his choices. "Only 7 subjects, Harry?" Cedric had asked, eyebrows raised. "I thought you'd go for the full 10 like the rest of us." Harry had simply shrugged. "I'll need the extra time this year," he'd replied. Harry's class choices had their consequences. That evening, as Harry was making his way back to the Ravenclaw common room, he found himself cornered by Professor Trelawney. Her enormous eyes, magnified behind her glasses, were brimming with tears. She was deeply hurt by her favorite pupil not continuing his studies with her. "Sorry, Professor, but I couldn't include your class in my schedule," Harry explained. "The Charms apprenticeship keeps me busy." "But my dear boy," she wailed, "you have such a gift. The inner eye speaks strongly in you. How can you abandon its call?" Harry thought of another excuse quickly, which he was sure would get the professor off his back. "Professor," he said solemnly, "I've had a vision. Dark times are coming for the wizarding world. I need to focus all my energy on learning to fight, to protect myself and others. But I promise, I'll continue my divination studies in my free time." Trelawney stared at him, her eyes unfocused. Then, in a voice deeper than her usual misty tones, she said, "Yes, yes, I see it too. Disaster approaches. You are wise to prepare, my dear. Remember, if you ever need guidance, my door is always open." Harry breathed a sigh of relief as she drifted away, crisis averted. The next day brought an interesting class. It was Harry's first Defense Against the Dark Arts class with the real Alastair Moody. Harry was curious how the old Auror would teach. Would he be like the imposter in the canon timeline? As the 6th-year students filed into the classroom, Moody's magical eye swiveled, taking in each student. The class had Ravenclaw and Slytherin students. "Right," Moody growled, his scarred face set in a grim expression. "I've heard your previous professors have been lacking. I've been assigned to fix all my predecessors' mistakes. Shields up, all of you. I'm going to test how well you can defend yourselves. You should be proficient in the shield spell by now." What followed was a chaotic hour of spellfire and yelps of surprise. Moody prowled the classroom, firing hexes and jinxes at unsuspecting students. Those whose shields held firm earned a grunt of approval. Those who faltered found themselves on the receiving end of stinging hexes or jellylegs jinxes. Moody's curses barely bothered Harry's shield, earning a grudging nod from the ex-Auror. But Harry noticed that Moody hadn't gone easy on anyone, giving everyone equal treatment, even the weaker students. However, Moody did treat the children of known Death Eaters differently. Although it wasn't obvious, he seemed to put a little extra power behind his spells when targeting them. Those students noticed as the class progressed and grew increasingly angry. "Your father would have blocked that easily, Warrington," Moody barked after Cassius Warrington's shield had shattered. Course, he had plenty of practice dodging horror spells back in the day. Moody, it seemed, found pleasure in embarrassing the children of Death Eaters. Perhaps this was his way of trying to make them change. Although it might backfire and lead them to hate him more, Moody didn't seem bothered. To those who tried to resist, Moody was harsher. Maybe he wanted to instill fear in them and use that to stop them from following their parents' path. Or maybe Harry was thinking too much and Moody was just having some fun. Anyway, Harry was relieved that there were no unforgivable curse demonstrations in the class like the fake Moody had done in the canon timeline. He had no idea how that had been allowed in the original timeline. It was illegal to perform the Imperious Curse on another person, and Harry was confused as to why this hadn't aroused any suspicion. The real Moody would never use illegal spells and give the Dark Faction and his enemies a chance to get him arrested. He was also a stickler for rules and constant vigilance. Harry concluded that the canon Dumbledore must have known and done a lot of work to keep the fake Moody's actions hidden from the outside world. As weeks passed with the school back in session, every night for the next week, Harry diligently checked the Marauders map, searching for any sign of Barty Crouch Jr. or other suspicious activity. But the map remained stubbornly normal, showing only the expected inhabitants of Hogwarts. No disguised Death Eaters, no Voldemort in hiding. The absence of any clear threat left Harry both relieved and unsettled. Harry really wanted insight into Voldemort's plan, so one night, he secretly left Hogwarts grounds through the Vanishing Cabinet and Apparat to Little Hangleton. He had checked a few weeks ago and found nothing, but he wanted to check again to see if he was lucky enough to find anyone from Voldemort's group. Even Wormtail would do. But as Harry explored the abandoned Riddle Manor, he was disappointed. The manor yielded no secrets, no hidden Dark Lords or their servants. Returning to Hogwarts, Harry's mind whirred with possibilities. How would Voldemort make his move? Harry really didn't like the feeling of not having information and knowing what was going to happen in the future. Now he'd have to remain vigilant, ready for any deviation from the events he remembered. The only consolation was that he was sure Voldemort had not been resurrected yet. In a moment of inspiration, Harry managed to catch a glimpse of Snape's forearm during a potions class. The dark mark was darker than it should be, but not the stark black that would indicate Voldemort's full return. It was a small comfort, but it confirmed that the resurrection ritual hadn't yet taken place. As September faded into October, Moody's classes continued to be the talk of the school. His lessons were special. You had to maintain constant vigilance at all times. Even while teaching theory, if someone wasn't prepared, they would be on the wrong side of a stinging hex. More than once, a daydreaming boy or a whispering girl found themselves on the receiving end of a stinging hex, followed by a loss of house points if they failed to shield in time. If they managed to shield the hex properly, they would be awarded points, which was a small consolation. Despite the intensity of the classes, most students seemed to be thriving under Moody's tutelage. There was a new air of confidence among the 6th years as they practiced their shields and counter curses. They were also beginning to pick up silent casting under his expert guidance. Harry, however, couldn't help feeling a twinge of disappointment. He didn't get any special attention from Moody. He had liked Moody's character in the canon timeline and hoped he would volunteer to give Harry some knowledge about how to handle real-life dangerous scenarios or offer him some special training, but nothing like that was forthcoming. Harry had thought Moody's character would appreciate talent, but it looked like his allegiance to Dumbledore was above all else. He stayed away from Harry except for classes. Although Harry did see him many times with Charles and his year mates. As October drew to a close, excitement began to build in the castle. Whispers about the approaching Triwizard Tournament grew louder, speculation about the tasks and the visiting schools running rampant through the corridors. On the morning of October 27th, a new notice appeared on the common room bulletin boards. Triwizard Tournament. The delegations from Beauxbatons and Durmstrang will be arriving at 6 o'clock on Friday the 30th of October. Lessons will end half an hour early. Students will return their bags and books to their dormitories and assemble in front of the castle to greet our guests before the welcoming feast. The announcement sent a ripple of excitement through the student body. As Harry read the notice, he remained outwardly calm, but inwardly, his mind was racing with possibilities. That night, as he lay in bed, Harry's thoughts swirled with potential scenarios. Voldemort was out there, planning, scheming. And somewhere, an agent of the Dark Lord was surely preparing to set those plans in motion. Harry did not like the feeling of not being in control, but he was confident he could handle any trouble as it came. Whatever challenges the Triwizard Tournament might bring, whatever plots Voldemort might hatch, he would be ready. The game was changing, but Harry Potter was determined to stay one step ahead. Chapter 227, The Arrival. The days leading up to October 30th were filled with a palpable excitement that permeated every corner of Hogwarts. The castle itself seemed to be preparing for the arrival of its guests, suits of armor were polished to a gleaming shine, portraits were scrubbed clean, and even Peeves the poltergeist was threatened with expulsion if he didn't behave. The staff, too, seemed affected by the impending arrivals. Their usual patience wore thin as they drilled students on proper etiquette and pushed for exemplary performance in classes. The message was clear: Hogwarts' reputation was at stake. On the morning of the 30th, as Harry made his way down to breakfast following his rigorous morning exercises, snippets of animated conversation drifted to his ears. "I heard Bose Batons is where all the beautiful witches study," a third-year Hufflepuff whispered excitedly. "There's a theory that many of the students there are descendants of Vila." His friend scoffed, "Don't get your hopes up. They won't give your face a second look. It's the Durmstrang lot we should be excited about. I bet they know loads of dark magic." Harry suppressed a smile, knowing the reality would both meet and subvert these expectations. Classes that day crawled by at a glacial pace. Even the professors, usually masters of composure, betrayed signs of tension, their lessons more serious and stricter than usual. This added pressure only intensified the students' anticipation. Finally, at 5:30, the bell rang, signaling the end of lessons. A tidal wave of students rushed back to their respective common rooms, hastily depositing bags and donning cloaks before surging towards the entrance hall. In the entrance hall, heads of houses corralled their charges into orderly lines. Professor Flitwick's diminutive form was barely visible as he squeaked instructions to the Ravenclaws. "Miss Lovegood, straighten your hat. Mr. Boot, remove that ridiculous badge at once." Luna emerged from her dreamy state long enough to adjust her hat, while Terry Boot reluctantly unpinned his Victor Crumb Fan Club badge, scowling all the while. As they filed out onto the grounds, Harry found himself between Reggie and Roger. The crisp autumn air crackled with anticipation. "Nearly 6, Roger muttered, checking his watch for the umpteenth time. "How do you reckon they're coming?" "The train." Reggie shook his head. "Doubt it. Maybe portkeys? Or they could create a spectacle by arriving on brooms. Imagine that, a sky full of wizards descending on Hogwarts." Harry, recalling the spectacular arrivals from his foreknowledge, remained silent, an enigmatic smile playing on his lips. Suddenly, Dumbledore's voice rang out from the back row where he stood with the other teachers. "Aha! Unless I am very much mistaken, the delegation from Bose Batons approaches." A fifth year near Harry pointed toward the Forbidden Forest, shouting, "There!" Something large was hurtling across the deep blue sky toward the castle, growing larger all the time. "It's a dragon!" shrieked one of the first years, losing her head completely. "Don't be stupid. It's a flying house," said Dennis Creevy. Dennis's guess was closer to the mark. Harry, with his enhanced sight, could make out the gigantic, powder blue, horse-drawn carriage, the size of a large house, soaring toward them. It landed with a tremendous crash, bouncing on its vast wheels, while the golden horses tossed their enormous heads and rolled large, fiery red eyes. The horses were a Braxton, a breed of winged horses, each the size of an elephant. A boy in pale blue robes leapt down from the carriage, bent forward, fumbled for a moment with something on the carriage floor, and unfolded a set of golden steps. He sprang back respectfully. Then Harry saw a shining, high-heeled black shoe emerging from the inside of the carriage. A shoe the size of a child's sled followed, almost immediately, by the largest woman he had ever seen in his life. As tall as Hagrid, Madame Maxime stepped out of the carriage, followed by her students. Harry's eyes scanned the group, landing on a familiar face, Fleur Delacour. She looked just as he remembered, beautiful, graceful, and slightly aloof. Her allure, apparently uncontrolled, had already ensnared many of the Hogwarts students. Harry knew her current arrogance would diminish as the tournament progressed. The odds were stacked against her, and she might even lose to Charles in the tasks. That would surely hurt her pride. As Dumbledore began to clap, the Hogwarts students followed his lead. Madame Maxime relaxed into a gracious smile and walked forward toward Dumbledore, extending a glittering hand. Dumbledore, though tall himself, barely had to bend to kiss it. "My dear Madame Maxime," he said warmly. "Welcome to Hogwarts." "Dumbledore," Madame Maxime replied in her deep voice. "I hope I find you well." "In excellent form, I thank you," Dumbledore responded genially. Harry's attention turned towards the other Beauxbatons students, who were shivering in the cold. Their school robes, while beautiful and made of fine silk, provided little protection against the Scottish chill. Harry found their discomfort amusing, noting how they seemed to have forgotten they possessed magic that could easily solve such minor inconveniences. Unlike the depiction in the movies, Beauxbatons was a mixed school, not an all-girls institution. The ratio of boys to girls was almost equal. They all regarded Hogwarts with a mixture of apprehension and distaste, perhaps finding the ancient castle lacking in comparison to their own, more opulent school. Has Karkaroff arrived yet? Madame Maxime inquired. He should be here any moment, Dumbledore assured her. Would you like to wait here and greet him, or would you prefer to step inside and warm up a trifle? Warm up, I think, Madame Maxime decided imperiously. Come, she commanded her students, and the Hogwarts crowd parted to allow her and her charges to pass up the stone steps. The Hogwarts contingent then waited for the Durmstrang party to arrive, most gazing hopefully at the sky. A few minutes later, Harry's attention was drawn to the lake. The previously smooth, black surface was no longer placid. Great bubbles formed on the surface, waves washing over the muddy banks, and then, out in the very middle of the lake, a whirlpool appeared. What seemed to be a long, black pole began to rise slowly out of the heart of the whirlpool. Slowly, magnificently, a ship rose out of the water, gleaming in the moonlight. It had a strangely skeletal look, as though it were a resurrected wreck. Finally, with a great sloshing noise, the ship emerged entirely, bobbing on the turbulent water, and began to glide toward the bank. A few moments later, they heard the splash of an anchor being thrown down in the shallows, and the thud of a plank being lowered onto the bank. People disembarked, their silhouettes past the lights in the ship's portholes. As they drew nearer, walking up the lawns into the light streaming from the entrance hall, they all looked bulky. Harry realized their bulk was due to the thick, shaggy furs they wore. The man leading them up to the castle was wearing furs of a different sort, sleek and silver, like his hair. Dumbledore! He called heartily as he walked up the slope. How are you, my dear fellow, how are you? Blooming, thank you, Professor Karkaroff, Dumbledore replied cordially. Harry watched as Karkaroff shook Dumbledore's hand with both of his own. His eyes, unlike Dumbledore's twinkling ones, were cold and shrewd. Behind him, Harry could see Victor Krum, looking surly and somehow smaller in person than he remembered from the World Cup match. Harry, it's Krum! Roger exclaimed, barely containing his excitement. Yes, it's Krum, Harry replied, slightly exasperated. Why are you so excited? I already told you he would be here for the tournament. I just can't believe it's real, Roger gushed. You know, even though I'm not a seeker, I'm his biggest fan. I hope he can give me some Quidditch tips. Learning from a pro would be great for my future Quidditch career. Harry sighed, for your sake, I hope he's a friendly and talkative kind of guy. Don't get your hopes up though. I have a feeling he's not that approachable. Roger's enthusiasm remained undimmed, however, and he wasn't alone. Excited whispers rippled through the Hogwarts students as Krum passed. Another celebrity had arrived at Hogwarts, and Harry hoped this might divert some attention away from him. He had grown weary of his own popularity recently, finding it increasingly difficult to enjoy his nightly outings and morning exercises on the Hogwarts grounds without attracting unwanted attention. He silently wished that Krum and Fleur could absorb some of the fanatic energy that seemed to follow him everywhere. With both delegations arrived, Dumbledore invited everyone into the castle for the welcoming feast. As they moved inside, Harry hung back, his eyes scanning the grounds one last time. There was still no sign of any intruders, and this fact troubled him. Harry found himself at a loss. He had no idea how this year would unfold. In the best-case scenario, Charles wouldn't be chosen as a champion, and with only 3 champions, it would be an ordinary year. Voldemort would have to find some other way to resurrect himself. However, Harry didn't think this outcome was likely. Both Dumbledore and Voldemort, in their own ways, would ensure that this year was far from quiet. Harry trusted both of them, albeit for very different reasons, to make certain of that fact. Chapter 228, The Welcoming Feast and a Discovery. The Great Hall, always a marvel of magical architecture, seemed to shimmer with an extra layer of enchantment as students from all 3 schools found their seats. The attention Victor Krum garnered from the Hogwarts crowd was nothing short of remarkable. Harry, accustomed to being the center of attention, found himself observing the spectacle with a mixture of amusement and relief. He watched as many students craned their necks, jumping up and down on the soles of their feet to catch a glimpse of the back of Crumb's head. Several sixth-year girls were frantically searching their pockets as they walked, their voices carrying across the hall in excited whispers. "Oh, I don't believe it, I haven't got a single quill on me. Do you think he'd sign my hat and lipstick?" Reggie, noticing Harry's bemused expression, leaned in with a grin. "The craze for Crumb is really something. Harry, you've been betrayed by your fans so easily." Harry chuckled, shaking his head. "I'm thankful he's taken the spotlight. It was starting to get on my nerves. More importantly, I'm grateful that no one's asked me to sign their hat and lipstick. That would have been embarrassing." Reggie laughed as he and Harry took their seat at the Ravenclaw table. A few seconds later, Roger joined them, his face flushed with excitement after having had his fill of staring at Crumb. The Ravenclaw table was unusually crowded this evening. The Beauxbatons students had chosen to sit among them, their powder blue uniforms standing out starkly against the sea of black Hogwarts robes. Harry couldn't help but notice their glum expressions as they looked around the Great Hall, clearly unimpressed by their surroundings. 3 of them were still clutching scarves and shawls around their heads, as if the Scottish castle's warmth was insufficient for their delicate constitutions. This apparent disdain for Hogwarts didn't go unnoticed by the host students. Harry could sense a ripple of indignation spreading among his schoolmates, their pride in their ancient school bristling at the Beauxbatons students' thinly veiled contempt. The Beauxbatons students, however, were unbothered. Meanwhile, across the hall, Victor Crumb and his fellow Durmstrang students had settled themselves at the Slytherin table. The Slytherins, predictably, looked insufferably smug about this arrangement. Roger, still craning his neck to catch glimpses of Crumb, grumbled, "Why did we get stuck with these snobs while the Slytherins got Crumb? This is so unfair." Reggie nudged him sharply. "Roger, you might want to lower your voice. We have company, and it looks like some people heard you. That girl over there is glaring at us now." Harry followed Reggie's gaze to see none other than Fleur Delacour fixing them with an icy stare. She was sitting opposite Harry, and ever since she had laid eyes on him, she had been glaring daggers in his direction. Harry found her childish display of rivalry rather amusing. Roger, oblivious to the tension, continued, "I wasn't that loud. I don't think she heard that and is glaring at me. It looks like she's glaring at Harry." Reggie's eyebrows shot up in surprise. "Oh. It looks like you're right. Harry, why is that beauty glaring at you? Her admirers have started noticing, and you might have enemies soon." Harry shrugged nonchalantly. "Don't pay attention to her. She's just one of the opponents I defeated in the dueling arena and is being a sore loser." "Harry," Reggie hissed, "you should have lowered your voice. It seems like she heard that." Indeed, Fleur had caught every word, her face flushing with anger. In retaliation, she sent the full force of her allure towards Harry. While Harry remained unaffected, his 2 friends weren't so lucky. Before they could embarrass themselves, however, Harry quickly snapped them out of their stupor with a sharp nudge and a muttered counter-charm. Reggie blinked rapidly, shaking his head as if to clear it. "What was that?" Roger, looking equally dazed, mumbled, "It felt like Vila Allure." Harry nodded grimly. "That's because it was. That girl there is a descendant of a Vila. So be careful when you're around her. Her allure can be potent." Fleur, visibly frustrated that her attack had failed to affect Harry, was about to try something else when the staff entered, filing up to the top table and taking their seats. Last in line were Professor Dumbledore, Professor Karkaroff, and Madame Maxime. When their headmistress appeared, the pupils from Beauxbatons, including Fleur, leapt to their feet in a display of respect that seemed almost comical in its formality. A few of the Hogwarts students couldn't suppress their laughter, but the Beauxbatons party appeared quite unembarrassed and did not resume their seats until Madame Maxime had taken her place on Dumbledore's left-hand side. Dumbledore remained standing, and a hush fell over the Great Hall. The headmaster's eyes twinkled as he gazed out over the sea of faces, his presence commanding attention without effort. "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, ghosts and most particularly guests," said Dumbledore, beaming around at the foreign students. "I have great pleasure in welcoming you all to Hogwarts. I hope and trust that your stay here will be both comfortable and enjoyable." One of the Beauxbatons girls gave what was unmistakably a derisive laugh, earning more ire from the Hogwarts school body. But again they were not bothered one bit. In the canon it was Fleur who laughed, but here it was another girl since Fleur had been busy glaring at Harry to do anything. "The tournament will be officially opened at the end of the feast," said Dumbledore. "I now invite you all to eat, drink, and make yourselves at home." With a wave of his hand, the golden plates before them filled with food. The feast was as sumptuous as ever, with an array of dishes that reflected the international nature of the gathering. Alongside the usual Hogwarts fare, Harry could see bouillabaisse, coq au vin, and ratatouille, clearly catering to the beaux batons palate. From the Durmstrang end, he spotted hearty stews, pierogies, and what looked like a whole roasted wild boar. Around him, Harry could hear his fellow Ravenclaws attempting to engage the beaux batons students in conversation, with varying degrees of success. Some of the French students were warming up slightly, their initial disdain softening in the face of genuine curiosity and hospitality. Others, however, remained aloof, picking at their food with expressions of mild distaste. Harry, for his part, was content to focus on his meal. There would be plenty of time to make friends, or rivals, over the coming year. For now, the array of food before him demanded his full attention. As Harry finished his meal and looked up, his gaze was drawn to two new additions at the staff table, Ludo Bagman and Bartolomew's Crouch Sr. Harry's eyes lingered on Crouch, a sense of unease prickling at the back of his neck. Something was off about the man, though Harry couldn't quite put his finger on what. Acting on instinct, Harry secretly took out the Marauder's map, muttering the activation phrase under his breath. His eyes scanned the staff table on the magical parchment, landing on the name Barty Crouch. Just Barty Crouch, no senior or junior to distinguish which Crouch it was. Harry's suspicions deepened. He watched Crouch closely over the next few minutes, noting how the man's mannerisms seemed off. They didn't match the Crouch Senior that Harry had seen numerous times at the Bones Manor. Then, he saw it, Crouch discreetly gulping from a personal flask. The pieces clicked into place in Harry's mind. This wasn't Bartolomew's Crouch Sr. at all, it was Barty Crouch Jr., using Polyjuice Potion to impersonate his father. This explained why Moody hadn't been replaced by Junior as in the original timeline. Pettigrew must have told Voldemort about the Marauder's map, and the Dark Lord had realized his original plan was insufficient. A polyjuiced impostor would have been discovered by Harry the moment he entered the castle. They had now come up with this workaround. Voldemort must have figured out that the map wouldn't distinguish between Senior and Junior, allowing Junior to replace his father undetected. Harry had to admit, it was clever. By impersonating his father, Crouch Jr. had access to the Triwizard Cup, ensuring it could be tampered with to enter Charles as a competitor. Harry felt a surge of pride at having unraveled the plot, feeling once again in control of the situation. Now, all he had to do was keep a close eye on the imposter Crouch and anticipate his next move. As Harry pondered these revelations, the golden plates were magically wiped clean, signaling the end of the main course. Dumbledore rose to his feet once more, and a palpable tension filled the hall. Even the usually rebellious Weasley twins were now staring at Dumbledore with rapt attention, all thoughts of mischief momentarily forgotten. Chapter 229, The Goblet of Fire. The moment has come, Dumbledore announced, his eyes twinkling as he surveyed the sea of expectant faces. The Triwizard Tournament is about to start. Before we bring in the casket, allow me to explain the procedure for this year. He introduced Mr. Bartolomew's Crouch, head of the Department of International Magical Cooperation, and Mr. Ludo Bagman, head of the Department of Magical Games and Sports. Bagman, perhaps due to his fame as a beater or his more affable appearance, received notably louder applause. Dumbledore continued, Mr. Bagman and Mr. Crouch have worked tirelessly on the tournament arrangements. They will join myself, Professor Karkaroff, and Madame Maxime in judging the champions' efforts. At the mention of champions, the hall grew even quieter if that were possible. Dumbledore, noting the heightened attention, smiled and called for Mr. Filch to bring in the casket. Filch approached, carrying an ancient, jewel-encrusted wooden chest. As he placed it before Dumbledore, excited whispers rippled through the hall. The champions will face 3 tasks throughout the year, Dumbledore explained, testing their magical prowess, daring, deductive skills, and ability to cope with danger. A charged silence fell over the hall at the mention of danger. 3 champions will compete, 1 from each school, Dumbledore continued calmly. They will be marked on their performance, with the highest total after the 3rd task winning the Triwizard Cup. The champions will be chosen by an impartial selector, the Goblet of Fire. Harry was a little surprised by the rule of the person with the highest total winning the cup. Wasn't it the one who reached the cup first who won? This made Harry curious, was the 3rd task changed later to make the competition more exciting, or to make it easier for Junior to whisk Charles away? With 3 taps of his wand, Dumbledore opened the casket and extracted a large, roughly hewn wooden cup brimming with dancing blue-white flames. He placed it atop the closed casket, clearly visible to all. Aspiring champions have 24 hours to submit their names, Dumbledore explained. Write your name and school clearly on a parchment and drop it into the goblet. Tomorrow night, Halloween, the goblet will select the 3 it deems most worthy. He continued, to prevent underage students from yielding to temptation, I will draw an age line around the goblet of fire. Nobody under 17 will be able to cross it. Dumbledore's tone grew serious. I must stress that this tournament is not to be entered lightly. Once selected, a champion is bound by a magical contract to see the tournament through. There can be no change of heart. Be absolutely certain you are prepared before entering your name. Now, it's time for bed. Good night to you all. As the students began to disperse, excited chatter filled the air. Reggie turned to Harry, his eyes gleaming with curiosity. An age line. Surely it could be fooled by an aging potion, right? Is that how you are going to help the Weasley twins enter? Harry smirked. No, an aging potion won't beat Dumbledore's age line. I have a much simpler solution. You'll kick yourself when I show you later. Why all the secrecy? Reggie pressed. Why not tell me now? It's easier to demonstrate, Harry replied, a mischievous glint in his eye. Besides, I want to wait until everyone's tried their various methods to bypass the line. It'll be more entertaining that way. Reggie sighed dramatically. Fine, have it your way. Just make sure I'm around when you reveal your grand plan. Roger, who had been quiet until now, chimed in. Where do you think the visiting students will be staying, Harry? In their transport, of course, Harry answered. The Beauxbatons carriage and Durmstrang ship are plenty big enough. Why? Hoping to bunk with Crumb. Reggie gasped in mock offense. Roger. Are you ending our friendship to sleep in the same room as Crumb? I never thought our bond was so fragile. Roger rolled his eyes. Don't be so dramatic. I was just curious. I didn't want them staying with the Slytherins, that would make those snakes unbearable. Weird priorities, mate, Reggie chuckled. Most boys would be more interested in where the Beauxbatons students are staying, not Durmstrang. Enough. I don't like where this is going, Roger exclaimed, his face reddening. Let's head back to our dorms. I want to be up early to watch all the excitement tomorrow. Harry and Reggie shared a laugh as they followed a hastily retreating Roger. As they left the Great Hall, they witnessed a brief altercation. Karkaroff and his students had exited at the same time as the Golden Trio, and the Durmstrang headmaster immediately recognized Charles Potter by the wand-shaped scar on his forehead. Before Karkaroff could say anything, however, Professor Moody appeared, causing the Durmstrang headmaster to beat a hasty retreat. It seemed Karkaroff had no desire to face the infamously paranoid ex-Auror. As they continued towards their dormitory, Harry's mind wandered to the new ring on his finger. If anyone looked closely, they would notice that the Potter heir ring on Harry's hand had changed into a much more regal-looking ring with the Potter emblem on it. This was the Potter Lord ring. When he had turned 17 on October 12, the first thing he did was rush to Gringotts to undergo the Potter Lordship test. Unlike his father James Potter, Harry had passed the test successfully and was now proudly the new Lord Potter. He had unlocked all the vaults and properties of the Potter family but had not yet explored them. He was waiting for the holidays before going through the Potter assets. Frequently missing from school would lead the professors to suspect something was amiss, and Harry didn't want to cause himself any unnecessary trouble. His birthday, other than the claiming of the ring, had been a low-key affair. A small gathering with his friends and receiving gifts from them and his family was pretty much it. The transition to adulthood in the wizarding world had brought no dramatic changes, no physical transformations, no sudden surge in magical power. In many ways, Harry remained unchanged, save for the added year and the weighty ring on his finger. As the new Lord Potter, however, Harry had gained himself a seat on the wizarding governing body, the Wizengamot. Harry would now have to learn his way around that place. Arcturus had promised to provide a comprehensive briefing during the holidays, a prospect that filled Harry with a mix of anticipation and trepidation. Harry had not paid much attention to things other than gaining strength over the years. It was good to learn how the wizarding world and the ministry functioned. But all this was for later. The topic at hand was the champions' selection tomorrow and the chaos that was going to cause. Harry was a little excited to watch everything happen in front of his eyes. He would have fun seeing everything play out as a spectator. Harry had decided against interfering with Voldemort's plans for Charles, at least for now. His brother had the support of their parents and Dumbledore, after all. As Harry climbed into bed that night, his mind buzzed with anticipation for the coming days. Playing around with the events of the tournament was going to be fun. Chapter 230, Submitting Names to the Goblet of Fire. The morning after the arrival of Beauxbatons and Durmstrang dawned with an air of excitement. Students rushed to the Great Hall, eager to witness the spectacle of name submissions for the Triwizard Tournament. A sizable crowd had already gathered around the Goblet of Fire, its blue-white flames dancing hypnotically. Every few minutes, a brave soul would step forward, parchment in hand, to submit their name for consideration. Harry knew that the more secretive candidates had likely entered their names the previous night, away from prying eyes. He couldn't help but wonder if Barty Crouch Jr. had already slipped Charles's name into the goblet for the non-existent fourth school. Harry mused that the tampering to allow 4 schools instead of 3 must have been done earlier. Unlike the fake Moody in the canon with his all-seeing magical eye, Crouch would never have had a chance to modify the goblet secretly while it was at Hogwarts. As Harry and his Ravenclaw dorm mates arrived at the Great Hall, they found the rest of their friends already present. Cedric, Angelina, and Roger stood together, a mix of nervousness and excitement on their faces. They had all agreed to enter their names as a group. However, before they could proceed with their plan, a commotion near the age line caught everyone's attention. Fred and George Weasley, accompanied by their friend Lee Jordan, were preparing to make their attempt at entering the tournament. Cedric turned to Harry, curiosity in his eyes. "What do you think they're up to?" Reggie smirked knowingly. "Most probably having a go at the age line with an aging potion. Their plan was no secret. Everyone knows." Harry's eyes twinkled with amusement. "It won't work, but I'm expecting some entertainment." The crowd, which included the Golden Trio, watched with bated breath as Fred stepped forward. "Ready?" he said to the other 2, quivering with excitement. "Come in, then I'll go first." Fred pulled out a slip of parchment bearing the words Fred Weasley Hogwarts. He approached the edge of the line, rocking on his toes like a diver preparing for a 50-foot drop. Then, with all eyes upon him, he took a deep breath and stepped over the line. For a split second, it seemed to have worked. George let out a yell of triumph and leapt after Fred. But the next moment, there was a loud sizzling sound, and both twins were hurled out of the golden circle as though thrown by an invisible shot putter. They landed painfully 10 feet away on the cold stone floor. To add insult to injury, there was a loud popping noise, and both sprouted identical long white beards. The entrance hall rang with laughter, even Fred and George joining in once they'd gotten to their feet and seen each other's beards. "I did warn you," said a deep, amused voice. Everyone turned to see Professor Dumbledore emerging from the Great Hall, his eyes twinkling as he surveyed the twins. "I suggest you both go up to Madame Pomfrey. She is already tending to Miss Fawcett of Ravenclaw and Mr. Summers, of Hufflepuff, both of whom decided to age themselves up a little too. Though I must say, neither of their beards is anything like as fine as yours." The crowd began to disperse as Fred and George set off for the hospital wing with a howling Lee. Now it was time for Harry's group to enter their names. Cedric went first, his entry earning a loud cheer from the Hufflepuffs in the hall. Angelina followed, receiving an even louder ovation from the boisterous Gryffindors. Roger was next, garnering polite applause from the Ravenclaw table. Suddenly, the hall fell quiet. All eyes turned to Harry. Everyone knew he was 17 and eligible to enter, and the whole school hoped he would. They knew their odds of winning the cup would be very high if the dueling champion participated. Under the expectant gaze of the entire hall, Harry walked up to the goblet, easily stepping over the age line. He dropped the slip of parchment bearing Hadrian Potter, Hogwarts into the blue-white flames. The reaction was immediate and deafening, cheers erupted from every Hogwarts table, a unified roar of support that took even Harry by surprise. Cedric nudged Harry, a hint of envy in his voice. "I'm jealous. You have the whole school rooting for you, Harry. While I only had my loyal puffs." Harry grinned mischievously. "If you want to be famous that badly," said, "I have some ideas. I assure you, you'll easily surpass my popularity if you follow my plan." Cedric's eyes widened in alarm. "No, I'm not jealous. I don't like the look on your face. I know what that means." Harry's shoulders slumped in mock disappointment. His idea was to have Cedric dress up in some fashion show-style clothes from the Muggle world would have to wait another day. He was certain that Cedric was born to be a model. The show would have been a hit. Unfortunately, his friend wouldn't even listen to the plan. After the excitement died down, Harry's group settled at a table for their meal. The relaxed rules due to the tournament allowed them to sit together, enjoying each other's company as they watched more people, including students from the other schools, entering their names. As they finished eating and prepared to leave, they were accosted by the Weasley twins, who had returned beardless but still determined. Their meal was interrupted by the return of the now beardless Weasley twins. "Oi, Harry!" Fred called out, a mischievous glint in his eye. "Our beardless benefactor!" George chimed in. "The man with the plan!" They chorused together. After some playful banter, the twins pressed Harry for his promised help in entering the tournament. Harry sighed dramatically. "You know, there was an easier way all along. All you had to do was ask a senior to enter your names for you. That way, the age line wouldn't be a problem." This revelation shocked not only the twins but also those around them. Reggie frowned. "Is this possible? Then who would the contract bind, the person whose name is entered or the person entering them?" Harry shrugged. "I'm not too sure since the goblet is old and no one has a complete idea of how it works, but I'd guess that the contract would bind the person who wrote the name on the parchment, not the person who entered it." Fred and George immediately set off, asking every of-age student they knew if they would enter their names. Most people, however, were hesitant due to the uncertainty about who the contract would bind. "No luck, Harry," Fred reported glumly. "Seems no one's keen on potentially binding themselves to a magical contract," George added. "Bunch of spoilsports, the lot of them," they grumbled in unison. "Any other tricks up your sleeve?" Fred asked hopefully. Harry smiled. "No need to be disappointed. I'll demonstrate an easier way." He took out an empty piece of paper, rolled it into a ball, and standing in front of the goblet but outside the age line, he aimed and threw the paper directly into the fire. The flames lit up red before returning to normal. "Merlin's saga left," Fred began. "Sock!" George finished. "That's brilliant." Fred and George tried but found their parchments too small or their aim lacking. Harry chuckled. "Did you two forget you had magic? Try the first-year spell." The twins' faces lit up with understanding. With a flick of their wands, their parchments floated in the air. After a few wand movements, the parchments were over the fire, and they let them fall. Their names were finally entered, and the twins celebrated exuberantly. As Lee Jordan entered his name the same way, the twins enveloped Harry in a bone-crushing hug. "Our hero!" Fred exclaimed. "Our savior!" George added. "Our ticket to eternal glory and a bag full of galleons!" They chorused. As they released him, Fred wiped an imaginary tear from his eye. "We're not worthy of your genius, O Great One. We shall erect statues in your honor," George declared solemnly. "Name our firstborns after you," Fred nodded. "Or at least our first successful product," George amended with a wink. Harry laughed, shaking his head at their antics. "Just try not to cause too much chaos, all right?" The twins gasped in mock offense. "Us? Cause chaos? Perish the thought, dear Harry," Fred said, placing a hand over his heart. "We're models of decorum and propriety," George added, attempting to look innocent and failing spectacularly. With final dramatic bows and profuse thanks, the twins sauntered off. Cedric, ever the voice of reason, expressed his concerns. "Harry, is this okay? Now maybe young students will enter their names, or someone might enter their junior's name." Harry reassured him, "I've already considered everything. The cup is designed to choose a worthy champion for each school, not someone at random. So I'm sure the cup would only choose amongst us adults. The younger students wouldn't fit the criteria. It's safe." Reggie still looked worried. "I hope so. I don't want you to be in any trouble." Harry shrugged nonchalantly. "It's not my fault they left behind such a glaring weakness. Some professors already saw what happened just now. Maybe the headmaster will come up with something to fix this loophole." With that, Harry and his group left the hall, leaving chaos in their wake as more and more people entered their names using Harry's method. However, it didn't last long. Harry later heard that a few minutes after they left, Dumbledore arrived and fixed the loopholes Harry had exposed. He transformed the age line into a shield that wouldn't allow anything to be thrown at it and stationed Moody near the cup to ensure no one was entered unwillingly. As the day passed, anticipation built for the Halloween feast and with it, the choosing of the champions. Harry found himself looking forward to the evening's events. Chapter 231, The Four Champions. The Great Hall buzzed with excitement as students filed in for the Halloween feast. For the first time in years, Harry Potter found himself among them. He had always avoided the Halloween celebrations, choosing instead to honor the memory of his grandparents who had sacrificed their lives to protect him and Charles from Voldemort on this very night, years ago. But tonight was different. The selection of the Triwizard Champions demanded his presence. As the golden plates filled with an array of dishes, Harry ate silently. His housemates, knowing the reason for his silence, decided not to disturb him. Finally, as the last of the desserts vanished, Dumbledore rose to his feet. The hall fell silent, tension palpable in the air. "The Goblet of Fire is almost ready to make its decision," Dumbledore announced. "When the champions' names are called, I would ask them to please come up to the top of the hall, walk along the staff table, and go through into the next chamber, where they will be receiving their first instructions." With a wave of his wand, all the candles except those inside the carved pumpkins were extinguished, plunging the hall into a state of semi-darkness. The Goblet of Fire now shone more brightly than anything in the whole hall, the sparkling bright, bluey whiteness of the flames almost painful on the eyes. Suddenly, the flames inside the goblet turned red. Sparks began to fly from it. The next moment, a tongue of flame shot into the air, a charred piece of parchment fluttered out of it. The whole room gasped. Dumbledore caught the piece of parchment and held it at arm's length so that he could read it by the light of the flames, which had turned back to blue-white. "The champion for Durmstrang," he read, in a strong, clear voice, "will be Victor Krum." A storm of applause and cheering swept the hall. Victor Krum rose from the Slytherin table and slouched up toward Dumbledore. He turned right, walked along the staff table, and disappeared through the door into the next chamber. "Bravo, Victor!" boomed Karkaroff, so loudly that everyone could hear him, even over all the applause. "Knew you had it in you." The clapping and chatting died down. Now everyone's attention was focused again on the goblet, which, seconds later, turned red once more. A second piece of parchment shot out of it, propelled by the flames. "The champion for Beau's Batons," said Dumbledore, "is Fleur Delacour." Fleur rose gracefully to her feet, shook back her sheet of silvery blonde hair, and swept up between the Ravenclaw and Hufflepuff tables. When Fleur Delacour too had vanished into the side chamber, silence fell again, but this time it was a silence so stiff with excitement you could almost taste it. "The Hogwarts champion next." And the Goblet of Fire turned red once more, sparks showered out of it, the tongue of flame shot high into the air, and from its tip, Dumbledore pulled the third piece of parchment. "The Hogwarts champion," he called, "is Hadrian Potter." The uproar that followed was deafening. Every single Hogwarts student had jumped to their feet, screaming and stamping, as Harry made his way past them. He strode towards the staff table and followed Krum and Fleur into the side chamber. After Harry left for the antechamber, the excitement in the Great Hall began to die down. Dumbledore was smiling, about to congratulate the three schools on their champions when suddenly, the Goblet of Fire turned red once more. Sparks flew out of it. A long flame shot suddenly into the air, and borne upon it was another piece of parchment. Automatically, it seemed, Dumbledore reached out a long hand and seized the parchment. He held it out and stared at the name written upon it. There was a long pause, during which Dumbledore stared at the slip in his hands, and everyone in the room stared at Dumbledore. Finally, Dumbledore cleared his throat and read out, "Charles Potter." The Great Hall fell into stunned silence. Every head turned to where Charles sat, his face a mixture of shock and confusion. At the staff table, Professor McGonagall and Professor Potter had gotten to their feet and swept past Ludo Bagman and Professor Karkaroff to whisper urgently to Professor Dumbledore, who bent his ear toward them, frowning slightly. Charles sat frozen in his seat, unable to move. Hermione and Ron were staring at him, open-mouthed. Up at the top table, Professor Dumbledore had straightened up, nodding to Professor McGonagall. "Charles Potter!" he called again. "Charles? Up here, if you please." "I didn't put my name in," Charles said blankly to Ron and Hermione. "You know I didn't." But his friends just stared at him, their expressions a mix of shock and disbelief. Professor Dumbledore called once more, "Charles Potter." With a gentle push from Hermione, Charles got to his feet, trod on the hem of his robes, and stumbled slightly. He set off up the gap between the Gryffindor and Hufflepuff tables. The buzzing grew louder and louder as he neared the top table. After what seemed like an hour, he was right in front of Dumbledore, feeling the stares of all the teachers upon him. Well, through the door, Charles, said Dumbledore. He wasn't smiling. As Charles moved off along the teacher's table, whispers broke out like little hissing fires all over the hall. Some students stood up to get a better look at Charles as he left the hall. In his wake, chaos erupted. Students from Bose Batons and Durmstrang were shouting in outrage. Hogwarts students were divided, some cheering for having two champions, others protesting the unfairness. Karkaroff and Madame Maxime were on their feet, demanding explanations from Dumbledore. Professor McGonagall was trying to restore order, while Snape's face had twisted into a sneer of disgust. Amidst the uproar, Dumbledore called for silence, his voice magically amplified. Silence! The hall gradually quieted, all eyes on the headmaster. We have an unexpected situation, Dumbledore said gravely. Rest assured, we will investigate this thoroughly. For now, I ask you all to return to your dormitories in an orderly fashion. Prefects, please lead your houses. Heads of houses, please join me in the antechamber. The scene goes back to when Harry entered the chamber after getting selected as the Hogwarts champion. The small room was lined with paintings of witches and wizards. A handsome fire was roaring in the fireplace opposite him. Victor Crumb and Fleur Delacour were grouped around the fire. Crumb, hunched up and brooding, was leaning against the mantelpiece, slightly apart from Fleur. Fleur Delacour looked around when Harry walked in and threw back her sheet of long, silvery hair. She had expected her rival to be selected and decided to ignore him for now. An awkward silence fell over the room. Harry, deciding to break the ice, turned to Crumb. I must say, your Quidditch skills are impressive. The way you play Seeker is unlike anything I've seen before, it's truly exciting to watch. Crumb's usually surly expression softened slightly. Thank you, he said in his thick accent. I have heard of your dueling prowess as well. It is most impressive. Fleur scoffed at this. Harry raised an eyebrow at her. Is there a problem, Miss Delacour? Or have you learned nothing beyond using your allure to win duels? Fleur's eyes flashed dangerously. I have trained hard to defeat you, Potter. I will be at the next dueling tournament, and I will emerge victorious. Harry smirked. Keep dreaming, Delacour. Before Fleur could retort, they heard an uproar from the Great Hall. Crumb and Fleur turned to Harry, confusion was evident on their faces. Harry shrugged. Something unexpected must have happened. Bad things tend to occur at Hogwarts on Halloween, so this isn't entirely surprising. Before they could question him further, the door opened and Charles Potter stumbled in, looking pale and confused. Harry frowned. Charles, you shouldn't have come in here. Charles looked at his brother, bewildered. It's not my fault. My name somehow came out of the goblet as the fourth champion. Dumbledore asked me to join you. I didn't want to. Harry's expression darkened. You've made a mistake in coming here, Charles. By entering this chamber, you've accepted the contract and agreed to participate in the tournament. You should have stayed outside and disagreed with everything. That way, the contract couldn't have formed. Charles's face drained of color. Then, did Grandpa Dumbledore not know this? Why did he force me to participate? Before Harry could respond, Ludo Bagman burst into the room, beaming. Extraordinary! He muttered, squeezing Charles's arm. Absolutely extraordinary! Gentlemen, lady, he added, approaching the fireside and addressing the other three. May I introduce incredible though it may seem the fourth Triwizard champion. Victor Crumb straightened up. His surly face darkened as he surveyed Charles. Fleur Delacour tossed her hair, smiling, and said, Oh, very funny joke, Mr. Bagman. Joke? Bagman repeated, bewildered. No, not at all. Charles's name just came out of the goblet of fire. But evidently Zaire has been a mistake, she said contemptuously to Bagman. He cannot compete. He is too young. Harry kept silent while Charles watched everything in a low mood. The door behind them opened again, and a large group of people came in, Professor Dumbledore, followed closely by Mr. Crouch, Professor Karkaroff, Madame Maxime, Professor McGonagall, Professor Snape, and to Harry's surprise, Lily Potter, who immediately rushed to Charles's side. Madame Maxime, said Fleur at once, striding over to her headmistress. They are saying that this little boy is to compete also. What is the meaning of this, Dumbledore? Madame Maxime said imperiously. I'd rather like to know that myself, Dumbledore, said Professor Karkaroff. He was wearing a steely smile, and his blue eyes were like chips of ice. 2 Hogwarts champions? I don't remember anyone telling me the host school is allowed 2 champions, or have I not read the rules carefully enough? He gave a short and nasty laugh. Say impossible, said Madame Maxime, whose enormous hand with its many superb opals was resting upon Fla's shoulder. Hogwarts cannot have 2 champions. It is most unjust. We were under the impression that your age line would keep out younger contestants, Dumbledore, said Karkaroff. It's no one's fault but Potter's, Karkaroff, said Snape softly. His black eyes were alight with malice. Don't go blaming Dumbledore for Potter's determination to break rules. He has been crossing lines ever since he arrived here. Thank you, Severus, said Dumbledore firmly, and Snape went quiet, though his eyes still glinted malevolently through his curtain of greasy black hair. Dumbledore was now looking down at Charles, who looked right back at him, confusion and a hint of betrayal in his eyes. Did you put your name into the goblet of fire, Charles? Dumbledore asked calmly. No, said Charles. His eyes then narrowed. Professor, did you know that by coming in here, I was accepting the contract? Harry says if I had disagreed in the hall, I could have escaped this. Dumbledore's eyes widened in shock. He turned to Crouch. Barty, is this true? Crouch nodded solemnly. I'm afraid so, Albus. Mr. Potter is now bound by the magical contract. He is, indeed, the 4th champion. According to the rules, he could have withdrawn from the tournament had he not walked into this chamber to join the other champions. Harry had to give it to Junior. He was acting exactly like Crouch Sr. he had seen many times. His acting was worthy of an Oscar, and if Harry hadn't known it was Junior under Polyjuice, he too would have been fooled. Maybe Dumbledore knew too, but no one could ever be sure what went on in that old man's mind. Realizing he had failed Charles, Dumbledore decided to change the subject and rounded on Harry. This is your doing, isn't it? Your leaking of the loopholes must have led to someone entering Charles. Harry stood his ground. With all due respect, Headmaster, my leaking was a calculated move. I was certain that only I or one of my friends would be chosen as the Hogwarts champion. The others simply don't have the skill or worthiness for such a role, and the cup would not choose them. Madame Maxime interjected, but now Hogwarts has another champion. That's not my fault, Harry retorted. The cup should have chosen only 3 champions. It appears someone tampered with it to make it a quad tournament and entered Charles as the only student of that school. If someone else, like one of my friends, had been entered along with Charles, he wouldn't have been selected. Harry then turned back to Dumbledore. This is your fault, Headmaster, for not checking for tampering before deciding on the judge, and for enforcing Charles's participation. Dumbledore, realizing his mistake, quickly changed the subject again. He turned to Crouch. Barty, is the contract truly binding? Crouch examined the slip of parchment bearing Charles's name. Mr. Potter, is this your handwriting? Charles nodded miserably. Yes, it's from one of the autographs I gave to a fan at the beginning of this year. Crouch sighed. Then I'm afraid it is valid. As the room erupted into protests, Harry's thoughts turned inward. He wasn't completely sure if the contract with Charles was truly binding. His belief was that no contract should have formed between Charles and the cup with the autographed parchment since Charles didn't have the intent to enter. Magic always worked on intent, so the contract should not have formed. But Harry wasn't entirely certain, and since Dumbledore wasn't doing anything to challenge it, he decided not to intervene. Besides, he wanted everything to proceed as it had in the canon timeline so that he could use it to his advantage. Karkaroff and Madame Maxime continued their vehement protests, while Moody began throwing out accusations of dark magic. Amidst the chaos, Bagman attempted to brief the champions on the first task, scheduled for November 24th. As the meeting concluded and the champions were dismissed, Harry made his way back to Ravenclaw Tower, where he knew a celebration awaited him. Despite the events, Harry's mind was calm. Everything had happened according to his expectations. He was still in control. Chapter 232, The Aftermath of the Champion Selection. The Ravenclaw common room was alive with celebration when Harry finally made his way back to his dormitory. The excitement of having their housemate chosen as the Hogwarts champion had the Ravens in high spirits, and it was well past midnight when Harry could finally retreat to his room. As he entered, he found Roger and Reggie waiting for him, their faces a mix of excitement and concern. Roger spoke first, his voice tinged with curiosity. "Are you not mad, Harry, that your moment was stolen by your brother also becoming a champion. Harry sank onto his bed, a wry smile playing on his lips. No, I'm not mad. To be honest, I expected something like this to happen, so I was prepared. Reggie's eyes widened in surprise, nearly choking on the Bertie Bott's every flavor bean he'd been chewing. What? You knew Charles was going to be selected? Harry shook his head, his green eyes glinting in the dim light. No, not specifically. But I knew something was going to happen. Why? Just because today was Halloween. Something wrong always happens on Halloween at Hogwarts. Maybe it's a curse. Reggie's mouth formed an O of realization. Blimey, with all the excitement, I completely forgot today was Halloween. Well, that explains the unexpected show. Roger leaned forward, his brow furrowed in thought. So how do you reckon he got into the tournament? Harry ran a hand through his messy hair, considering his words carefully. No idea, to be honest. He got in not as the Hogwarts champion, but as the champion of a fourth school. It takes powerful magic to tamper with an artifact like the Goblet of Fire, which Charles is certainly not capable of. So someone wanted him to be in the tournament. As for the reason, he trailed off, leaving the ominous implication hanging in the air. Reggie waved a dismissive hand, nearly knocking over a stack of books on his nightstand. Well, Charles would have to do his best to come out of this alive. He is not a contender for the cup since he stands no chance against you three, apart Vila, Krum, or you, Harry. He's going to have a tough time of it. Roger nodded in agreement, his voice taking on a more serious tone. Yet, Dumbledore would have to do something to ensure he even survives. The dragon you mentioned is in the first task. The room fell silent for a moment, the gravity of the situation sinking in. Roger and Reggie knew that even if Harry had no familial feelings for the Potters, he would not want his younger brother to be injured or die in this tournament. With a collective sigh, they called it a day, each lost in their own musings about the tournament ahead. The next morning, the Great Hall buzzed with excited chatter as students filed in for breakfast. At the staff table, Dumbledore stood, his usual twinkling eyes somber under the watchful and angry gaze of Lily Potter. She did not like the fact that her young boy was forced to participate in this dangerous tournament. Students, Dumbledore's voice carried across the hall, instantly quieting the chatter. I must address the events of last night. It has come to our attention that someone tampered with the Goblet of Fire, causing it to select a champion for a non-existent fourth school. I want to make it abundantly clear that Charles Potter is not responsible for his inclusion in the tournament. Murmurs rippled through the crowd as Dumbledore continued, however, due to the nature of the magical contract formed by the goblet, Charles must participate or risk losing his magic. We are investigating this matter thoroughly and will take all necessary precautions to ensure the safety of all champions. As Dumbledore's words sank in, Harry observed the reactions around him. Unlike the canon universe, where there had been no such clarification, leading to bullying, this time an angry mother had forced Dumbledore to make the announcement. However, as Harry looked around, he noticed that there might not have been a need for it. Unlike the canon, where jealousy and resentment had run rampant, the student body seemed largely sympathetic to Charles's plight. Even the Slytherins, usually quick to mock, appeared more intrigued than antagonistic. Perhaps it was because in this world, the fourth champion, Charles, had not stolen the thunder of the underappreciated Hufflepuff house. This removed most of the bitterness. Over at the Gryffindor table, Harry noticed Ron Weasley's face contorted with a mix of jealousy and betrayal. It seemed some things remained constant across timelines. However, Hermione and Ginny Weasley sat resolutely by Charles's side, expressions a mixture of worry and determination. Outside the castle walls, the wizarding world was abuzz with the news of the fourth champion. The Daily Prophet's headline screamed, Potter Dynasty aims for Triwizard domination. Rita Skeeter's article was a masterpiece of insinuation and conspiracy, suggesting the Potters had orchestrated Charles's entry to increase their chances of victory. Harry couldn't help but smirk as he read the outlandish theories. They were a fun read. Life as a champion brought its own set of challenges for Harry. His already considerable fan following had grown to almost unmanageable proportions. Even with Victor Crum's presence in the castle, Harry found himself constantly dodging admirers, often resorting to his invisibility cloak for moments of peace. Blimey, Harry, Cedric commented one day as they watched a group of giggling third-years hurry past. I thought I was having it bad in the school, but this is another level entirely. Harry sighed, running a hand through his perpetually messy hair. Tell me about it. I'm considering setting up a decoy to throw them off the scent. Cedric grinned. When you do come up with such a spell, teach it to me too. I might need it as well. In the days that followed, Lily Potter threw herself into preparing Charles for the challenges ahead. Harry often saw them in empty classrooms, Lily drilling Charles on defensive spells and evasive maneuvers. She even convinced Moody to help. One evening, as Harry was leaving the library, Lily approached him, her green eyes, so like his own, filled with a mixture of hope and desperation. Harry, she began, her voice trembling slightly. I know things between us are complicated. But please, if you can, look out for Charles. He's in over his head, and I'm terrified for him. Harry regarded her coolly. After a moment, he gave a noncommittal nod and walked away, leaving Lily standing in the corridor, her shoulders sagging with the weight of her worries. Harry had promised his grandmother that Halloween night that he would keep his brother safe, and even without Lily's reminder, he would have done that. Charles might fall into some dangerous situations, but Harry would be there to control the situation and ensure that Charles got out without much harm. Harry might be the only champion who was not practicing desperately. Enough said about Charles's training with Lily and Moody, even the other champions were not idle. Fleur Delacour could often be seen practicing intricate wand movements by the lake, her silvery hair glinting in the autumn sun. Victor Crumb, when not being mobbed by fans, spent hours in the library, poring over books on magical creatures and defensive spells. Harry, meanwhile, was still assisting his master Flitwick in his apprenticeship duties. They did duel every now and then, but it was all the usual. Nothing special for the tournament. Flitwick knew Harry could handle anything that came at him. Chapter 233, Weighing of Wands. As the days inched closer to the first task of the Triwizard Tournament, Hogwarts buzzed with anticipation and intrigue. Amidst this charged atmosphere, Harry found himself at the center of an unexpected confrontation. Draco Malfoy, in his misguided attempt to mock Charles, had created badges that read Hadrian Potter, the real Hogwarts champion, which then changed to Potter Stinks. The Slytherin fourth year had managed to convince only his closest cronies to wear them, but it was enough to catch Harry's attention. In his haste to sow discord and cause Charles some embarrassment, Malfoy had overlooked a crucial detail: Harry was also a Potter. The Lord Potter, in fact. Before the badges could spread further, Harry cornered Malfoy in a deserted corridor. "Clever badges, Malfoy," Harry said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "But I think they need a little adjustment." With a flick of his wand, the words Malfoy Stinks appeared across Draco's forehead in glowing green letters, as well as on the badge. As Malfoy and his stooges fled in fear, frantically trying to remove the magical inscription, Harry couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. However, Draco Malfoy was not one to give up easily. Someone must have helped him understand his mistake, for he returned with a new batch of badges, this time reading "Charlie is a cheater and Charlie stinks." The absence of the Potter name was noticeable. This new taunt riled up Charles, leading to several confrontations between the two fourth years. Draco found himself on the receiving end of Moody's unique brand of discipline, while Charles faced Snape's wrath. These incidents provided entertainment for the whole school, a welcome distraction from the mounting tension of the approaching tournament. As the days passed, the champions were summoned for the traditional wand-weighing ceremony. Harry arrived at the designated classroom to find Crumb and Fleur already present, both looking visibly annoyed, their faces edged with irritation. The reason for their expressions became immediately apparent as a flash of acid green blocked Harry's view of the room. Rita Skeeter, adorned in her signature lurid robes, approached Harry, her quick quotes quill dancing in anticipation. "Ah, our third champion!" Rita cooed, her eyes gleaming behind her jeweled spectacles. "How about a quick interview? The public is dying to know more about the elusive Hadrian Potter." Harry's response was curt and firm. "I give no interviews, Ms. Skeeter. You should know this already." Undeterred, Rita turned her attention to the other champions. Crumb grunted noncommittally, his surly expression deepening, while Fleur turned away with a disdainful sniff, her silvery hair whipping around dramatically. Frustrated but persistent, Rita returned to Harry, her smile now strained. "Come now, Mr. Potter. Surely you understand the importance of keeping your adoring public informed." As Rita continued to press, ignoring his clear dissatisfaction, Harry felt his patience wearing thin. With a subtle flex of his magical core, he allowed his power to seep into the air around them. The temperature seemed to drop, and the lights flickered ominously, casting eerie shadows across the room. Rita's eyes widened, her smile faltering for the first time as she took an involuntary step back. Even Fleur and Crumb were visibly shocked, their previous annoyance replaced by a mix of awe and apprehension. Ludo Bagman, who had been present for some time, also seemed unnerved. He had allowed Rita free rein, knowing the publicity would benefit the tournament, but now he realized that antagonizing the elder Potter might not be wise. Harry leaned in, his voice low and laced with warning. "Miss Skeeter, let me be clear. I know you're angry, but if any false or unsubstantiated news about me appears in the Prophet under your name, there will be consequences." His green eyes bored into hers as he added, "I'd hate to have to keep a beetle in a glass jar, if you catch my meaning." Rita blanched, her quick quotes quill falling still for once. She didn't know how Harry had discovered her secret, but she understood the gravity of his threat. One letter from Harry could see her in Azkaban for being an unregistered animagus. The tense moment was broken by Charles's arrival, accompanied by an excited Colin Creevey, his camera flashing incessantly. Rita's face lit up at the sight of the younger Potter, her previous fright forgotten in the face of a more amenable target. "Ah, Charlie! How about a little chat?" she purred, leading the bewildered boy towards a nearby broom cupboard. As the door closed behind them, Harry shook his head, a mixture of amusement and resignation on his face. Some things, it seemed, were destined to happen regardless of the timeline. Moments later, Dumbledore entered with Mr. Ollivander, his long silver beard gleaming in the candlelight, signaling the start of the ceremony. Charles was freed from Skeeter's clutches, looking slightly disheveled and dazed, as if he'd just emerged from a whirlwind. Ollivander's eyes twinkled as he examined each wand in turn, his fingers moving with practiced precision. Fla's wand, containing a Vela hair core, elicited a raised eyebrow. Crumb's hornbeam and dragon heartstring wand earned an approving nod. When it came to Harry's turn, Ollivander paused, a look of intrigue crossing his face. "Ah, Mr. Potter. Your wand, Blackthorn and Thunderbird Tail Feather, if I recall correctly. A most unusual combination and a special wand I crafted. You have taken good care of it." Harry nodded, acutely aware of the curious glances from the others in the room, their eyes darting between him and his wand. Ollivander continued, his voice filled with reverence, "Blackthorn, traditionally associated with warfare and overcoming adversity. And the Thunderbird Feather, a core of great power, capable of casting curses as easily as it can sense danger. A wand for a wizard of exceptional skill and destiny, I'd say." As Ollivander handed the wand back, Harry could feel Dumbledore's piercing gaze upon him, those blue eyes seeming to X-ray him. He met the headmaster's eyes steadily, unafraid and unyielding. Next was Charles's turn. This time even Harry was curious. He had no idea what wand his brother had. Was it the Phoenix Feather one? But Harry did not think that was possible. The character of Charles and the way he was raised was completely different from Tom Riddle. And as Harry had expected, he was proven right shortly. Ollivander held Charles's wand delicately, a thoughtful expression on his face. "Ah, young Mr. Potter. Maple and unicorn hair, 11 inches, quite flexible. A wand of great potential, especially suited for charms work and transfiguration." Charles nodded nervously, clearly uncomfortable with the attention. Ollivander continued, his voice taking on a scholarly tone, "Maple wands are known to choose wizards of great ambition and travelers. The unicorn hair core provides consistency and loyalty. A fine wand for a young wizard still finding his path." With a flourish, Ollivander conjured a stream of golden bubbles from Charles's wand before handing it back with an approving smile, the bubbles floating gently around the room. The ceremony concluded with a photo session, during which Harry carefully positioned himself to avoid being front and center. He did not need more crazy fans. He had more than he could handle already. With the wand weighing behind them, the reality of the impending first task loomed larger than ever. The champions were putting in last-minute efforts, their faces edged with determination and a hint of fear. Harry, however, felt a thrill of excitement coursing through him. The dragons were coming. Chapter 234, The Dragon's Arrival. The morning after the wand-weighing ceremony, the Great Hall erupted into a frenzy of excitement as owls swooped in, delivering the latest edition of the Daily Prophet. The front page featured a large group photo of the champions, but it was Rita Skeeter's gossip column that truly set tongues wagging. True to form, Skeeter had spun a sensational tale titled Sibling Rivalry, The Dark Truth Behind the Potter Brothers. The article painted Charles as a jealous younger sibling, desperate to outshine his increasingly popular older brother. Sources close to the Potter family reveal that young Charles has long lived in the shadow of his prodigious brother, Hadrian, the article read. With Hadrian's recent rise to fame as a dueling champion and now Hogwarts' true Triwizard contender, it seems Charles could no longer bear to be second best. In a desperate bid for attention, he somehow entered himself into the tournament, hoping to defeat his brother and reclaim his spot as the wizarding world's golden boy. The piece went on to recount various fabricated incidents where Harry had allegedly outperformed Charles, each anecdote more outlandish than the last. Harry, reading the article over breakfast, couldn't help but chuckle. Skeeter had heeded his warning, focusing her gossip-mongering on Charles instead. Satisfied, he passed the paper to Cedric, who let out a low whistle. "Merlin's beard, Harry," Cedric said, shaking his head in disbelief. "This is some top-tier rubbish, even for Skeeter." Roger, peering over Cedric's shoulder, snorted. "I particularly like the bit where Charles tried to transfigure your robes into clown suits out of spite but it backfired on him. I think I'd remember if that happened." Harry leaned back, a wry smile playing on his lips. "You know, Rita's really not using her full talent here. She should have a go at writing fiction. With this imagination, she could be a bestseller in no time." Reggie nodded in agreement, his eyes twinkling with mirth. "True that. Though given the current standard of wizarding literature, with Lockhart being a bestseller and all, she might already be considered a literary genius." As they continued to dissect and laugh at the increasingly outlandish claims in the article, Harry couldn't help but feel a twinge of sympathy for Charles. He glanced over at the Gryffindor table, where his younger brother sat, red-faced and slumped over his breakfast, clearly trying to avoid the stares and whispers around him. However, Harry's focus soon shifted to more pressing matters. Through his network of magical creatures in the Forbidden Forest, he had learned that the dragons for the first task had arrived. With the task only a few nights away, Harry decided it was time for a little adventure. That evening, as the castle settled into its nightly routine, Harry gathered his friends, Cedric, Roger, Reggie, Angelina, Alicia, Arabella, and Elvinia. Under the cover of darkness and with liberal use of disillusionment charms, they slipped out of the castle and into the Forbidden Forest. As they ventured deeper into the woods, excitement and nervousness crackled in the air like static electricity. "Harry, are you really taking us to see dragons?" Angelina whispered, her eyes wide with a mix of fear and anticipation. Harry nodded, a mischievous glint in his eye. "Yes, and trust me, it'll be worth it." Reggie looked skeptical, his face pale in the moonlight. "And you're sure we won't get caught? Or, you know, eaten? Where's your sense of adventure, Reg?" Arabella teased, though her voice trembled slightly. As they pressed on, the sound of distant roars grew louder. Suddenly, a burst of flame lit up the sky above the treetops, causing everyone to duck instinctively. "Merlin's beard," Roger gasped, his voice a mix of awe and terror. "This is really happening." They crept closer, hiding behind a thick cluster of trees at the edge of a large clearing. What they saw made their jaws drop in collective astonishment. 4 enormous dragons thrashed against their restraints, while a team of handlers struggled to maintain control. Sparks flew as spells collided with scales, and the air was thick with smoke and the handlers' shouts. In the first enclosure, a Swedish short snout paced restlessly. Its silvery blue scales gleamed in the moonlight as it let out periodic bursts of brilliant blue flame, scorching the ground around it. "Beautiful, but deadly," Angelina murmured, her voice barely audible over the dragon's roars. Next to it, a common Welsh green thrashed against its chains. Its smooth green scales rippled as it moved, its long neck swaying as it snapped at any handler who dared come close. The third enclosure housed a Chinese fireball. Its scarlet scales and golden spikes around its face gave it a regal appearance, but there was nothing majestic about the way it spewed mushroom-shaped flames at its captors. But it was the fourth enclosure that drew everyone's attention. The Hungarian horntail, larger and more fearsome than the others, was a sight to behold. Its black scales seemed to absorb the light around it, and its bronze horns glinted menacingly. As they watched, it let out a roar that shook the very ground beneath their feet, following it up with a jet of flame that nearly engulfed one of the handlers. Harry's friends turned to him, their faces a mix of awe and terror. "I've seen dragons before," Harry explained, his voice low and calm. "On a vacation to one of the dragon reserves. But they were nothing like this. There, the dragons were calm, happy to rest in their caves. These, they're agitated. The trip to Hogwarts has clearly put them in a foul mood." Reggie nodded, his analytical mind working overtime. Makes sense. They've been displaced from their territory, probably separated from their normal food sources. No wonder they're irritable. They continued to watch as the handlers struggled to maintain control. Despite their best efforts, the dragons seemed determined to make their displeasure known. As they prepared to leave, Harry's eyes were drawn back to the horntail. Even though according to the canon, the fourth champion, Charles, should get the horntail, looking at the beast nearly burning one of the caretakers, Harry had a feeling that he was fated to face this particular dragon. However, instead of being worried, Harry felt a surge of excitement. He couldn't wait to test his skills against such a formidable opponent. "Harry?" Cedric asked, noticing his friend's intense gaze. "What is it?" Harry shook his head slightly, a smile playing on his lips. "Just thinking about how exhilarating it would be to face the dragon." Cedric wiped sweat from his brow, looking at Harry as if he'd gone mad. "Only you, Harry. I'm glad I wasn't chosen as champion. I wouldn't want to face that beast." Reggie, always the analytical one, studied the dragons closely. "They're all females," he observed. "And nesting mothers by the look of it. That's why they're so ferocious." Elvinia turned to Harry, horror dawning on her face. "You're not telling me you have to fight one of these?" Before Harry could respond, Reggie shook his head. "No, that can't be it. There's no way 17-year-olds could take on a dragon in direct combat. It's more likely you'll have to steal something from them. Probably an egg." The group watched for a while longer, wincing each time a handler narrowly avoided a jet of flame or a sweeping tail. "We should head back," Harry finally said. "We've seen enough." As they made their way back to the castle, the roars of the dragons echoed behind them, a constant reminder of the challenge that lay ahead. The first task was no longer an abstract challenge, it was a very real, very dangerous ordeal. Cedric clapped Harry on the shoulder, his face set with determination. "Whatever you have to do, mate, we're here to help you prepare." The others nodded in agreement, their faces a mix of determination and concern. Harry's eyes gleamed with confidence. "Don't worry, guys. I already knew about the dragon, remember? I have an amazing plan already in mind. Just wait for the show." As they snuck back into the castle, Harry's mind was already racing with possibilities. He had a plan, one that would not only complete the task but also showcase his abilities in a way that would leave everyone astounded. The first task couldn't come soon enough. Chapter 235, Preparations for the First Task. The morning of November 24 dawned crisp and clear, a deceptively beautiful day for such a perilous event. As the sun climbed higher, excitement rippled through Hogwarts like a living entity. Students and staff alike made their way down to the edge of the Forbidden Forest, where a massive arena had materialized overnight, a testament to the power of magic. The newly constructed stadium was a marvel of magical engineering. Towering stands surrounded a rocky enclosure, the perfect stage for the impending clash between champions and dragons. As spectators filed in, the air buzzed with anticipation and the faint scent of smoke, a portent of the fiery spectacle to come. In the champions' tent, Harry stood with Crumb, Fleur, and Charles. The atmosphere was tense, each lost in their own thoughts as they prepared for the challenge ahead. Harry observed his fellow champions. Crumb's surly expression betrayed a hint of nervousness, Fleur's usual grace was tinged with anxiety, and Charles, his younger brother, looked pale but determined. Before Ludo Bagman could enter with his purple silk bag, Harry stepped out of the tent, a determined look etched on his face. He had a mission, to prevent an overlooked tragedy from the original timeline, one that had been carelessly disregarded by everyone else. With purposeful strides, Harry approached the judges' table where Dumbledore, Karkaroff, Madame Maxime and Barty Crouch Sr. sat, engrossed in a serious conversation. Their voices hushed as Harry drew near, 4 pairs of eyes turning to regard him with varying degrees of curiosity and suspicion. "Excuse me," Harry said, his voice polite but firm, "I have a concern about the task that I believe needs to be addressed immediately." The judges looked at him with a mixture of surprise and curiosity. Dumbledore's eyes twinkled as he asked, "And what might that be, Mr. Potter?" Harry took a deep breath, steeling himself. "I understand the task involves retrieving something precious that the dragon guards. Will the dragon be alone, or will it be guarding its eggs?" The reaction was immediate and intense. Madame Maxime's eyes narrowed suspiciously, her large frame seeming to grow even more imposing. "How do you know so much about the task, Monsieur Potter?" she demanded, her French accent thickening with her agitation. "It should have been a secret." Before Harry could respond, Karkaroff jumped in, his dark eyes flashing with accusation. Yes, Dumbledore, he sneered, stroking his goatee. Is Hogwarts cheating? I call for the disqualification of Potter. The tension at the table was palpable, thick enough to cut with a knife. But Harry remained calm, his posture relaxed yet confident. When he spoke, his voice was steady and clear, cutting through the accusations like a well-honed blade. You're mistaken, headmasters, he said, meeting each of their gazes in turn. No one helped me. I found and deduced everything on my own. He paused, allowing his words to sink in before adding, I can't say the same about other champions. The implication hung in the air, causing Karkaroff to shift uncomfortably and Madame Maxime to purse her lips. Harry continued, his voice taking on a more urgent tone, I heard about Hagrid's visit to the dragon enclosure a few days ago, and there were some unexpected visitors with him. He let that information settle, watching as the judges exchanged meaningful glances. But that's not why I'm here. Are there going to be real eggs involved? Dumbledore stroked his beard thoughtfully, his blue eyes piercing as he regarded Harry. Yes, Mr. Potter. The champions will have to collect a special golden egg from a nest of real eggs. Harry's face grew serious, his green eyes darkening with concern. Then my fears are confirmed, he said, his voice low but intense. Using real eggs poses an unnecessary risk. If they're accidentally destroyed during the confrontation, it would be a terrible loss for such a rare and endangered species. The judges exchanged glances, clearly taken aback by Harry's concern. Barty Crouch Sr. frowned, his brow furrowing. Mr. Potter, the use of real eggs is essential to ensure the dragon's protective instincts are fully engaged. It's crucial for the challenge of the task. Harry stood his ground, unwavering in his conviction. With all due respect, sir, I believe the risk outweighs the benefit. As a participant, I feel it's my duty to point this out. If something were to go wrong, the blame shouldn't fall on the champions. At that moment, a flash of acid green caught Harry's eye. Rita Skeeter had sidled up to the group, her quick quotes quill poised and ready, hungry for scandal. Harry suppressed a smile, her presence might just work in his favor. Perhaps, Harry continued, gesturing subtly towards Rita, we should consider the public reaction if rare dragon eggs were to be destroyed in what is essentially a school competition. The effect of his words, combined with Rita's presence, was immediate and profound. The judges shifted uncomfortably in their seats, clearly aware of the potential PR disaster looming before them. Dumbledore's brow furrowed as he stroked his beard, his mind visibly working through the implications. After a moment of tense silence, Dumbledore spoke, his voice grave. You raise a valid point, Mr. Potter, he said. Then, raising his voice slightly, he called out, Mr. Brown, could you join us please? The head dragon handler, a stocky man with burns on his arms, jogged over. His face was flushed with excitement, but it quickly turned to concern as Dumbledore explained Harry's fears. Brown's brow furrowed deeply as he listened. When Dumbledore finished, he shook his head, a mix of frustration and worry evident in his expression. I mentioned this to Mr. Bagman long ago, he said, his voice gruff with suppressed emotion. But he insisted that without the real eggs, the task wouldn't be exciting enough. He turned to Harry, a look of respect in his eyes. I share Mr. Potter's views. If anything happened to those eggs, it would be a catastrophe. Dragons are already endangered as it is. Harry, emboldened by the support, turned to face the judges directly. His voice took on a passionate tone as he spoke. I understand the need for challenge, he said, his green eyes blazing with intensity, but surely the safety of endangered species should take precedence. I'm merely pointing out that if something goes wrong, the responsibility should lie with the organizers, not the champions. As he spoke, he glanced meaningfully at Rita Skeeter, who was scribbling furiously, her eyes alight with the promise of a juicy story. The judges huddled together, whispering urgently. After what seemed like an eternity, they broke apart. Dumbledore cleared his throat, his blue eyes twinkling with what looked like approval. Mr. Potter, your concern is appreciated and, indeed, valid. We have decided to use artificial eggs for this task. Harry nodded, satisfied. As he turned to leave, he overheard Karkaroff muttering to Crouch, we'll bring the real eggs first, then switch them out just before the task begins. The dragons won't notice with all the commotion. Pretending not to have heard, Harry returned to the champion's tent, a small smile playing on his lips. He had achieved his goal, the rare dragon eggs would be safe. As he re-entered the tent, the other champions looked at him curiously, but before any questions could be asked, Ludo Bagman burst in. His round face was flushed with excitement, his lurid yellow robes clashing horribly with the tent's subdued colors. "Well, now we're all here, time to fill you in," Bagman announced brightly, his voice booming in the confined space. He held up a small sack of purple silk, shaking it enticingly. The soft rustle of whatever was inside added to the tension in the air. "When the audience has assembled, I'm going to be offering each of you this bag, from which you will each select a small model of the thing you are about to face. There are different, varieties, you see." He paused for dramatic effect, his eyes roving over each champion's face. "And I have to tell you something else too, yes, your task is to collect the golden egg." One by one, the champions reached into the bag. Fleur went first, her delicate hand emerging with the Welsh green. Crumb followed, drawing the Chinese fireball. As Harry stepped forward, Crouch suddenly spoke up. "Perhaps young Mr. Potter should go next," Crouch suggested, a strange glint in his eye. "He is, after all, the youngest." Harry's eyes narrowed slightly, but he nodded graciously. "Of course, Charles, go ahead." Harry now knew why he had the inkling he would be against the Horntail. The Crouch under disguise wanted him to fight the more difficult dragon and give the easier one to Charles. However, Harry had no problems with this, so he decided to let Charles go ahead. Charles reached in, his hand trembling slightly, and pulled out the Swedish short snout. The blue-grey dragon in his palm puffed a small jet of flame, causing Charles to nearly drop it. Finally, it was Harry's turn. Now certain of what awaited him, he calmly reached into the bag and drew out the last dragon, the Hungarian Horntail. The miniature beast was as fierce as its full-sized counterpart, its black scales gleaming in the tent's dim light. It snapped at Harry's fingers, tiny teeth glinting dangerously. Despite its ferocity, Harry found himself oddly drawn to the little creature. An idea began to form in his mind: with a bit of transfiguration and some permanent enchantments, this could make a delightful and unique toy for young Ares. As the champions awaited their turns, the roar of the crowd outside grew steadily louder. The excitement was palpable, seeping through the tent walls and adding to the nervous energy within. Each champion retreated into their own thoughts, no doubt running through strategies and spells in their minds. Chapter 236, The First Task Begins. The atmosphere in the champions' tent crackled with tension, a palpable energy that seemed to make the very air vibrate. Outside, the muffled roar of the crowd and the occasional dragon's bellow served as a stark reminder of what awaited them. Inside the tent, a clever silencing charm ensured that no external sounds could penetrate, preventing later champions from gaining an unfair advantage. Charles, Fleur, and Crumb exchanged nervous glances, a mix of anticipation and dread etched on their faces. Harry, however, maintained his composure, his mind already racing with strategies and contingencies. A ministry official poked his head into the tent. His face was a mix of excitement and nervousness as he announced, "Mr. Charles Potter, you're up first." Charles took a deep breath, his hand trembling slightly as he gripped his wand. With one last look at his fellow champions, he stepped out of the tent and into the arena. As the tent flap fell shut behind Charles, the remaining champions were left in tense silence. Harry felt a twinge of worry for his younger brother. Despite their complicated relationship, he couldn't help but hope for Charles's success and safety. Outside the tent, the scene was one of controlled chaos. The stands were packed with students, teachers, and visitors from all over the wizarding world. Flags of different colors waved in the air, representing Hogwarts, Beau's Batons, and Durmstrang. The excitement was palpable, a low hum of anticipation that seemed to vibrate through the very ground. Ludo Bagman's magically amplified voice boomed across the arena. "Ladies and gentlemen." His excitement was infectious. "Welcome to the first task of the Tri-Wizard Tournament. Our champions will face one of the most formidable creatures in the wizarding world, dragons. Their goal, to retrieve a golden egg from the dragon's nest. And now, let the task begin." As Charles stepped into the arena, a collective gasp rippled through the crowd. The Swedish short snout, with its silvery blue scales glinting in the sunlight, let out a terrifying roar. Charles looked tiny in comparison, a lone figure against the backdrop of the massive, fire-breathing beast. "And he's off." Bagman's commentary filled the air. Young Mr. Potter approaches cautiously. The short snout has spotted him. "Oh, it's not happy. Look at those flames." The crowd gasped audibly as a jet of blue-white fire shot from the dragon's mouth, narrowly missing Charles. The young champion dove behind a large boulder, his quick reflexes drawing appreciative murmurs from the audience. But wait! Mr. Potter is raising his wand. Yes, he's casting a spell, it's the conjunctivitis curse. Well executed, young man. A roar of pain from the dragon confirmed the spell's success. The short snout thrashed its head from side to side, its eyes swollen shut. The crowd held its collective breath, watching intently as Charles tried to make his way towards the nest. The short snout is in distress. Its eyes are swollen shut. But oh no! The dragon is thrashing about madly. It's knocking over rocks, smashing into Great Merlin's beard. Some of the eggs have been crushed. Bagman quickly added, not to worry, folks. I've just been informed that those were fake eggs. No harm done to any real dragon eggs today. In the stands, Hermione clutched Ron's arm tightly. Oh, I hope Charles is all right, she whispered, her eyes never leaving the scene before them. The dragon's rampage continues. Mr. Potter can't get near the nest. But what's this? He's raising his wand again, he's summoning something. A whooshing sound filled the air, and moments later, a broomstick zoomed into the arena, straight into Charles's outstretched hand. It's a broom. Brilliant strategy, playing to his strengths as a talented flyer. The crowd erupted in cheers as Charles mounted the broom and took to the air. For the next few minutes, they watched in awe as he weaved and dove around the agitated, half-blind dragon. His flying skills were impressive, drawing gasps and cheers from the audience with each daring maneuver. Ooh, narrow miss there, very narrow. He's taking risks, this one. Bagman's voice was thick with excitement. Another close call. The short snout may be blind, but those flames are still deadly. The crowd was making a great deal of noise now, their cheers and gasps punctuating Bagman's words. In the Gryffindor section, Neville had his eyes covered, peeking through his fingers, while the Weasley twins were on their feet, shouting encouragement. Then, suddenly, great Scott, he's done it. Charles Potter has got his egg. The noise from the crowd was deafening. Charles, clutching the golden egg to his chest, made a victory lap around the arena before landing. As he was led away for medical attention, the crowd continued to cheer, discussing his performance animatedly. Back in the champions' tent, the remaining three waited in tense silence. They had no idea what had transpired outside, but the muffled roars of both dragon and crowd had painted a vivid picture in their minds. Moments later, Charles stumbled back into the tent, his robe singed and torn, sporting several cuts and bruises. Madame Pomfrey immediately whisked him away for treatment. Harry was amazed and a little proud that Charles succeeded in getting the egg. The task was really difficult for someone his age. He had come a long way from his spoiled self that entered Hogwarts 3 years back. After a brief pause to reset the arena, it was Flea's turn. The ministry official returned. Miss Delacour, you're next. Fleur stood, her face pale but determined. As she moved towards the tent's exit, Harry spoke up. Miss Delacour, he said quietly, causing her to turn. Did you know that dragons snore hot breath too? Confusion flickered across Flea's face, but there was no time for questions. With a slight nod of acknowledgement, she stepped out to face her challenge. As Fleur entered the arena, the crowd hushed. The Welsh Green, with its smooth green scales, regarded her with reptilian curiosity. Flea's silver hair gleamed in the sunlight, a stark contrast to the rocky terrain around her. Miss Delacour enters the arena with grace, Bagman commented. The Welsh Green has spotted her, and it doesn't look pleased. Miss Delacour is beginning to wave her wand in an intricate pattern. Is she? Yes, I believe she's attempting to charm the dragon. The audience watched in fascination as Fleur began to sing softly, her voice carrying across the arena. The Welsh Green's eyes began to droop, its movements becoming sluggish. The Welsh Green's eyes are drooping, it's swaying slightly. Merlin's beard, I think she's putting it to sleep. The crowd murmured in amazement. Even the Durmstrang students looked impressed. The dragon is down. It's fallen asleep. Miss Delacour is approaching the nest carefully. Oh! The dragon has let out a tremendous snore, shooting a jet of flame. But look at that! Miss Delacour dodged it expertly. Flea's quick sidestep drew appreciative applause from the crowd. Her face was a mask of concentration as she carefully picked her way towards the nest. She's at the nest now, reaching for the golden egg. She's got it. Miss Delacour has succeeded. The audience erupted in applause as Fleur returned to the tent, slightly singed but triumphant. She caught Harry's eye and mouthed a quick merci before being led away for a checkup. "Mr. Crumb, you're up," the official announced. The Bulgarian stepped out, his shoulders set in determination. The crowd's excitement reached a fever pitch as the famous Quidditch player faced off against the Chinese fireball. "And now, Victor Crumb faces the Chinese fireball," Bagman announced. Crumb approaches with confidence, that's the mark of a true champion, folks. The fireball, with its scarlet scales and golden spikes around its face, was a fearsome sight. Crumb, however, showed no sign of intimidation as he strode forward, wand at the ready. The crowd held its breath as Crumb faced down the dragon. Crumb's raising his wand, and yes, he's also going for the conjunctivitis curse. A better attempt at the curse than the young Mr. Potter. A pained roar indicated Crumb's success. The fireball reared back, shaking its head violently as its eyes swelled shut. The fireball is in distress. Its eyes are swollen shut. But then Bagman's tone changed. "Oh no! The blinded dragon is stomping around in pain and anger. It's crushing some of the eggs. Remember folks, these are the fake ones, but it'll certainly cost Crumb some points." The audience winced collectively as the dragon's massive feet came down on the nest. Crumb stayed put for a few seconds waiting for the opportunity to rush in. As the huge dragon fell down in pain, the opportunity arrived, and Crumb darted forward with surprising agility for his bulky frame. Crumb's making his move. He's darting in, he's got the egg. Victor Crumb has completed the task, Bagman announced as Crumb swiftly retrieved the golden egg. As the crowd cheered, Crumb returned to the tent. He looked relatively unscathed, but his expression was grim. Without a word, he handed his golden egg to an official and went straight to Madame Pomfrey's makeshift infirmary. Finally, it was Harry's turn. As he stood, preparing to face his dragon, he felt a strange calm settle over him. He had faced worse odds before, and he was ready for this challenge. The tent flap rustled, and a ministry official appeared. "Mr. Hadrian Potter, you're up." With a determined nod, Harry stepped out of the tent and into the arena, ready to face the big lizard. The crowd fell silent as he emerged, all eyes on the elder Potter as he prepared to face the fierce Hungarian horntail. Chapter 237, Harry's Spectacular Performance. As Harry stepped into the arena, the Hungarian horntail's malevolent yellow eyes locked onto him. Smoke curled from its nostrils, and its spiked tail lashed menacingly against the rocky ground. The crowd held its collective breath, the tension palpable as they waited to see how the European dueling champion would fare against the most formidable dragon of the lot. Harry took a deep breath, his mind clear, his plan ready. This wasn't just about completing the task, it was about putting on a show, about demonstrating the true potential of magic when wielded with creativity and skill. And here comes Hadrian Potter, facing the fearsome Hungarian horntail. Bagman's voice boomed across the stadium, echoing off the stands. "This is arguably the most dangerous of all the dragons. How will the elder Potter fare?" While Bagman was commentating, Harry had already sprung into action. With a flourish of his wand, he began casting spells in rapid succession, his movements fluid and precise. The crowd gasped in amazement as the rocky terrain of the arena began to shift and change before their very eyes. Boulders transformed, taking on new shapes and colors. Within moments, an astonishing sight stood before them, an army of magical creatures, each bearing the colors of a Hogwarts house. The spectacle was nothing short of breathtaking. "Merlin's beard." Bagman's voice cracked with excitement, his commentary adding to the electric atmosphere. "I've never seen anything like this. Hadrian Potter has conjured an army of Hogwarts. We're seeing magic far beyond the typical curriculum here, folks." Majestic lions in scarlet and gold prowled at the forefront, their manes gleaming in the sunlight. Behind them, black and yellow badgers shuffled restlessly, their claws digging into the earth. Blue and bronze ravens perched on newly formed outcroppings, their intelligent eyes scanning the arena. And weaving between them all, emerald and silver snakes slithered silently, their scales glinting ominously. The horntail eyed this new development warily, smoke billowing from its nostrils in great, acrid clouds. For a moment, the arena was still, the calm before the storm. The crowd held its breath, waiting to see how this incredible display would unfold. Then, with a roar that shook the very foundations of the stadium, the battle began. The lions charged forward, their transfigured muscles rippling under their magical coats. The horntail met their charge with a blast of fire so intense that the heat could be felt even in the highest stands. The first wave of lions was incinerated, but as quickly as they fell, Harry conjured more to take their place, his wand a blur of motion. Incredible! Bagman shouted, his voice thick with awe. Potter is maintaining multiple complex transfigurations simultaneously. This is magic beyond Newt level, possibly beyond what many fully qualified wizards could manage. The ravens took to the air, diving and pecking at the dragon's eyes, distracting it from the main assault. Their blue and bronze feathers glinted in the sunlight as they swooped and dove with incredible precision. The dragon's tail lashed out, smashing several of the birds into puffs of blue and bronze smoke, but more appeared to replace them, Harry's concentration never wavering. "Look at that coordination!" Bagman continued, his voice filled with wonder. "The lions are keeping the horntail occupied while the ravens run interference. This is a master class in magical strategy. Potter isn't just showing magical prowess, he's demonstrating tactical genius." While the lions and ravens kept the dragon occupied in a dazzling display of magical combat, the badgers began their work. Unnoticed by the horntail, they started burrowing, their black and yellow forms disappearing into the earth. They worked with incredible efficiency, creating a network of tunnels that led towards the golden egg. "What's this?" Bagman exclaimed, his excitement infectious. "The badgers are digging. Potter is using every aspect of the house mascots to his advantage. Truly a tribute to the unity of Hogwarts. But what is Potter planning to do with these tunnels?" The crowd was on their feet, cheering and gasping in turns as the spectacle unfolded. Even the judges watched in awe, their scoring paddles forgotten for the moment. Professor McGonagall's eyes shone with pride, while Flitwick was practically bouncing in his seat. Snape, usually so stoic, couldn't hide a look of grudging admiration. "The badgers seem to have completed their network of tunnels," Bagman observed, his voice tinged with curiosity. "A clever strategy, but how will that help Potter get the egg?" As if in answer to Bagman's question, the snakes made their move. They slithered through the passages, unseen by the dragon still battling the lions and ravens. One particularly large snake, its emerald scales gleaming, reached the nest. In a feat of transfigured magic that drew gasps from the crowd, it opened its jaw impossibly wide and swallowed the golden egg whole. "I don't believe it!" Bagman yelled, his voice reaching a fever pitch. "The snakes have the egg. Potter has used the very essence of Slytherin cunning to secure his prize. This is magic that combines all four houses in a way I've never seen before." With their prize secured, the snakes retreated through the tunnels, moving with silent efficiency. The largest snake slithered up to Harry, regurgitating the egg at his feet. The golden surface gleamed, unmarred by its unusual journey. "He's done it!" Bagman yelled, his voice cracking with excitement. "Hadrian Potter has retrieved the egg in the most spectacular fashion I've ever seen. This isn't just completing the task, this is redefining what's possible in the Triwizard Tournament." Harry picked up the egg, holding it high for all to see. The crowd's roar was deafening, a wall of sound that seemed to make the very air vibrate. But Harry wasn't done yet. The transfigured creatures, their task complete, began to gather around Harry. What happened next left the audience breathless with wonder. The lions roared majestically, their voices harmonizing in a sound that stirred the heart of every Gryffindor present. The badgers performed a synchronized dance, their movements so perfectly coordinated it seemed impossible they were transfigured rocks. The ravens took to the air, flying in intricate patterns overhead, creating shapes and symbols that left the raven claws in the audience cheering with pride. And the snakes, in a display of magic so advanced it drew gasps even from the teachers, formed the words "thank you" with their bodies. "Unbelievable!" Bagman shouted, his voice hoarse from the constant commentary. "Potter's not just completed the task, he's putting on a show. This is magic at its most creative and impressive. I doubt we'll ever see anything like this again in the history of the Triwizard Tournament." As their final act completed, the transfigured creatures began to fade, returning to their original rocky forms. The transformation was gradual, allowing the audience to fully appreciate the mastery of transfiguration on display. When the last creature had returned to stone, the crowd erupted in thunderous applause, stamping their feet and chanting Harry's name. The spectacle had captivated everyone, from the youngest first year to the most seasoned professors. As Harry made his way out of the arena, he was mobbed by his friends. Cedric was the first to reach him, clapping him on the back with a wide grin that threatened to split his face. "That was bloody brilliant, Harry!" he exclaimed, his voice barely audible over the continuing roar of the crowd. Roger Davies and the Whitlock twins pushed through the throng next, their faces alight with awe and excitement. "Mate, that was incredible!" Roger shouted over the noise. "You showed them all what Ravenclaw is made of. The way you coordinated all those creatures, no words can describe the sight." Alicia and Angelina arrived, both looking awestruck. "Harry, you're amazing!" Alicia gushed. "The way you controlled all those transfigurations at once. I've never seen anything like it." His friends surrounded him, their excited chatter creating a bubble of celebration as they made their way to the judges' podium. At the podium, the judges conferred briefly before raising their wands. Madame Maxime, looking impressed despite herself, shot up a 9. Mr. Crouch, his face unreadable, gave a 10. Dumbledore, his eyes twinkling with pride, also raised a 10. Bagman, still buzzing with excitement from his commentary, enthusiastically displayed another 10. Then came Karkaroff's turn. The Durmstrang headmaster's face was a study in conflicting emotions. For a moment, it seemed he might actually award a fair score. But then, after a moment's hesitation, he reluctantly raised a 6. Hadrian Potter scores a total of 45 points. Bagman announced, his voice tinged with disbelief at Karkaroff's score. The crowd's reaction was immediate and vociferous, with boos and jeers directed at the Durmstrang headmaster. As they left the podium, Harry's friends erupted in outrage. 45. Cedric exclaimed incredulously, his face flushed with anger. After that performance? It should have been a perfect score. It's that git Karkaroff, Roger fumed, his hands balled into fists. He's obviously biased against non-Durmstrang champions. He gave Krum a 10 despite the eggs that were crushed. As they made their way back to the champions' tent, his friends filled him in on the other scores. Delacour got 43, Arabella reported, her tone suggesting she found even this score too high compared to Harry's performance. Krum got 40, and your brother got 38. Alicia added, her voice dripping with disdain, their low scores are because of Karkaroff, who is clearly cheating. It's not fair, Harry. You were leagues above the rest. Harry, however, remained calm. A knowing smile played on his lips as he said, "It's all right. The points won't stop me from winning the cup." His quiet confidence seemed to soothe his friend's indignation somewhat. As they approached the tent, a commotion drew their attention back to the arena. To everyone's horror, the dragon handlers seemed to have lost control of the horntail. The massive beast was moving freely, its chains hanging uselessly from its scaled hide. Screams erupted from the crowd as they realized the horntail had broken free from its restraints. Harry watched, his mind racing, as all the restraints snapped easily under a little force from the dragon. The restraints should have been far stronger, it looked as though they had been tampered with. Harry instantly understood that this had been prepared for him by someone, but since he had restricted the movement of the dragon during his performance, the restraints had not broken during his battle. Harry's gaze darted towards the judges' table, where they too were looking at the horntail with expressions of shock and fear. A suspicion formed in Harry's mind: could this be the work of the polyjuiced Crouch? Had he intended for the dragon to injure Harry, only for the plan to backfire due to Harry's quick completion of the task? The dragon, enraged and disoriented, took to the air with a mighty beat of its wings. It breathed a stream of fire towards the stands, causing panic among the spectators. People scrambled to escape, their screams filling the air. The handlers rushed forward, wands out, but they were too far away to intervene in time. Harry knew he had to act. He turned to his friends, his voice calm but commanding. "Run to safety. I'll handle this." His friends hesitated for a moment, torn between their concern for Harry and their trust in his abilities. "Be careful, Harry," Cedric said, speaking for all of them. They knew they would be a burden if they stayed. Harry was strong, and they believed he would come out of this unharmed. As his friends retreated to safety, Harry ran towards the enraged horntail. The fate of the crowd, and perhaps the entire tournament, now rested on his shoulders. There were professors and dragon handlers present, but Harry didn't trust them to control the situation without casualties. He had to act, and he had to act now. Chapter 238, The Dragon Rider. As the Hungarian horntail unleashed a torrent of flame towards the panicked crowd, Harry's wand slashed through the air. With a thunderous rumble, massive concrete walls erupted from the ground, intercepting the inferno mere feet from the spectators. The searing heat dissipated against the hastily conjured barrier, leaving behind scorched stone and a moment of stunned silence. Harry's mind raced. He knew he couldn't engage the dragon here, not without risking countless lives. The spells required to subdue such a beast would be too dangerous in these close quarters. No, he needed to lead it away, to draw the battle to a safer location where he could unleash his full power without fear of collateral damage. With a flick of his wand, Harry pointed towards the distant silhouette of Hogwarts Castle. "Oxio Firebolt!" he commanded, his voice carrying the urgency of the moment. While waiting for his broom, Harry conjured a flock of ravens, their midnight feathers glinting in the sunlight as they took flight. With another wave of his wand, he sent them to harass and distract the enraged Horntail, buying precious seconds. Around him, chaos reigned supreme. Dragon handlers rushed forward, their wands out and face set with grim determination, but their usual tools seemed ineffective against the dragon's unbridled fury. Professors herded terrified students away from the danger, their faces etched with worry and resolve. The air was thick with the acrid smell of smoke and the tang of fear. The distinctive whoosh of his firebolt pierced the cacophony of screams and roars. Harry leapt astride the broom with practiced ease, kicking off hard from the ground. He soared to eye level with the Horntail, unleashing a barrage of stinging hexes. The spells, harmless against the dragon's armored hide, nonetheless captured its attention, yellow eyes narrowing as they fixed on Harry. The human who had annoyed her a few minutes ago. What followed was a dizzying dance around the dragon's massive form. Harry weaved through the air with the grace of a seasoned Quidditch player, ducking between the Horntail's legs, looping around its thrashing tail, always just out of reach. The dragon's frustration grew with each near miss, its focus narrowing solely on the elusive wizard who dared to challenge it. Sensing the moment was right, Harry shot upwards, climbing higher and higher into the azure sky. The dragon hesitated for a split second, then with a thunderous beat of its wings that sent tremors through the air, gave chase. They climbed higher and higher, leaving the safety of the ground far below, the stadium shrinking to the size of a toy. Now began a deadly aerial ballet that would have left even the most seasoned broom flyer breathless. Harry corkscrewed and dove, the dragon's fiery breath singeing the tail of his broom. He led the beast away from Hogwarts, out over the Forbidden Forest, all the while formulating his next move. As they flew, Harry realized brute force wouldn't win this battle. The dragon, though enraged, was a magnificent creature deserving of respect. He needed to calm it and connect with it without causing it much injury. But first, Harry knew he needed to assert his dominance, to show the dragon that he was not prey, but a force to be reckoned with. Before calming it down, a beating to show Harry's strength might be necessary. Once they were a safe distance from Hogwarts and away from prying eyes, Harry did something unexpected. He stopped his firebolt mid-air and dismounted, floating effortlessly in the sky. With a casual wave of his hand, Harry sent his broom soaring away to safety. The dragon halted its pursuit, clearly confused by this strange human who could fly without aid. Its yellow eyes narrowed, trying to make sense of what it was seeing. Steam curled from its nostrils as it regarded Harry with a mixture of curiosity and wariness. Harry, drawing on the strength he'd gained as a knight and the flying ability he'd gleaned from Voldemort's memories, hovered confidently before the massive beast. He raised his hands, a smirk playing on his lips as he taunted the dragon. "Come on then," Harry called out, his voice carrying on the wind. "Let's see what you've got." The Horntail, enraged by this audacious challenge, charged forward with a roar that seemed to shake the very heavens. Harry met its charge head-on, his fist connecting squarely with the dragon's nose. The impact was tremendous, the sound of the collision echoing across the sky. But Harry found himself flung backward, tumbling through the air before regaining control. He had underestimated the dragon's strength. Despite being 7 to 8 times stronger than a normal adult from the years of training with the night breathing method, Harry realized he was outmatched in raw power against an adult dragon. Direct confrontation wasn't the answer, but he was far from defeated. Undeterred, Harry flew towards the dragon for another attempt. The Horntail breathed a massive gout of flame, a river of fire that threatened to engulf him. But Harry was ready. With a wandless gesture, he summoned a powerful gust of wind, redirecting the inferno harmlessly into the sky. As the dragon recovered from its breath attack, Harry seized the opportunity. He rushed in, delivering a powerful uppercut that rocked the Horntail's head back. The dragon's eyes rolled in its head, momentarily stunned by the force of the blow. And so began a true aerial battle, the likes of which had never been seen in the wizarding world. The dragon attacked relentlessly, snapping with its massive jaws that could crush stone, breathing streams of fire hot enough to melt steel, and lashing out with its spiked tail that whistled through the air. Harry dodged and weaved, using wandless wind spells to maneuver and deflect the flames. He threw in occasional thunder spells, using the loud cracks to disorient the beast and mask his movements. Harry's fists found their mark again and again, each blow enhanced by his knight's strength. But the dragon's hide was tough, like hitting a wall of living stone, and its stamina seemed endless. For every successful hit, Harry had to avoid a dozen potentially lethal attacks. The fight stretched on, a dizzying dance of man versus beast high above the earth. Sweat poured down Harry's face, his breath coming in ragged gasps as he pushed himself to his limits and beyond. His muscles screamed in protest with each movement, but he refused to give in. The dragon, too, showed signs of fatigue, its attacks becoming less coordinated, its body marked with bruises from Harry's relentless assault. As both combatants hovered, catching their breath, Harry knew he needed a new strategy. Brute force alone wouldn't win this fight. He could have had an easier fight if he had his sword with him, but that was put away since he could not bring anything to the task and the sword was not something he could summon with a simple summoning charm. Harry had to fight with what he had. He did not have the stamina to outlast the dragon, as impressive as his endurance was. He needed to connect with the dragon, to calm it, to show it that he was not the one to be messed with. With a wave of his hand, Harry conjured a makeshift saddle on the dragon's back, the magic shimmering as it took form. The horntail eyed this new development warily, smoke curling from its nostrils. But before it could react, Harry had maneuvered himself onto its back with a burst of speed that surprised even the dragon. The horntail bucked and rolled, desperate to dislodge its unwelcome passenger. It climbed higher into the sky, then plummeted towards the earth in a dizzying dive. It barrel rolled and looped, its movements so violent that any normal wizard would have been thrown off in seconds. But Harry held fast, his grip unyielding, his determination unshakable. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours as man and beast struggled for dominance in the sky. Gradually, almost imperceptibly at first, the dragon's movements became less frantic. Exhaustion and hunger began to take their toll on the mighty beast. Seizing the opportunity, Harry spoke, his voice calm despite the exertion of the battle. "Have you had enough? You should know I have not really used any spells to attack since I don't want to cause severe injuries to you. Do you want me to go all out?" However, even if the dragon understood Harry's words, it gave no sign. It began another round of attempts to dislodge Harry from its back, though its movements lacked their earlier ferocity. Harry tried again, but this time, struck by sudden inspiration, he spoke in Parseltongue, the language of serpents. The change was immediate and dramatic. The horntail's head swiveled, yellow eyes fixing on Harry with newfound interest. Though the dragon couldn't reply, Harry sensed it understood, a flicker of intelligence passing between them. Harry hissed in the serpentine language, his words carrying a hint of threat. "I don't want to hurt you badly, but I am losing my patience. You know how I got my ability to speak in this tongue? I killed a 1,000-year-old basilisk to gain this power. Do you want to follow in its footsteps? I hear dragon hide sells at a very good price." To drive his point home, Harry did something next that made the horntail more afraid than it had ever been in its life. He got off the dragon's back and, in mid-air, transformed into his animagus form, a thunderbird. The massive bird, almost 3/4 the size of the dragon, spread its wings wide. Lightning crackled between its feathers, and storm clouds began to gather around them. This display of power was the final straw. The fight drained out of the horntail, replaced by a wary respect for the wizard on its back. Now that the dragon had calmed, Harry summoned his broom back and guided the horntail towards Hogwarts. As they approached the school grounds, Harry first directed it towards Hagrid's pumpkin patch, where he knew a flock of sheep was kept for the dragon's meals. Harry motioned for the dragon to have its fill. A combination of punishment and rewards, he knew, was the best way to improve obedience. The horntail feasted, its aggressive demeanor melting away with each bite, replaced by a contentment that seemed almost comical on such a fearsome creature. The sight that greeted them was one of astonishment. It had been a couple of hours since Harry had led the dragon away, but the stadium was still surrounded by people. They were ready for battle, wands drawn and spells on their lips, but the sight of Harry calmly perched on the back of the now docile horntail stopped them in their tracks. Students, professors, and handlers alike stared open-mouthed as Harry guided the horntail to a gentle landing. As handlers rushed forward with chains, Harry held up a hand, his voice carrying across the hushed crowd. "There's no need for those," he called out. "I'll lead her to the forest myself. She's calm now and will follow my instructions." Dumbledore stepped forward, his blue eyes twinkling with a mixture of relief and intense curiosity. "Well done, Mr. Potter," he said softly, his voice carrying a hint of awe. Your quick actions have averted a tragedy. If you would, can you tell me how you subdued the horntail? Harry smiled enigmatically. Sorry, Professor, that is between the dragon and me, he replied. However, I can tell you it was a fierce fight, which you can already tell from the appearance of both of us. Indeed, both Harry and the dragon bore the marks of their epic battle. Harry's robes were singed and torn, his hair windswept and his face smudged with soot. The horntail's scales, usually gleaming, were dulled with exhaustion, and bruises were visible where Harry's blows had landed. Dumbledore was not satisfied with this answer, but he knew their relationship was not close enough for him to press the issue. Perhaps, he hoped, Harry would tell the story to others, and he could learn the details through them. The elder Potter was shocking him more and more. Strong magic and dueling skills were already known, but it would take more to subdue a dragon. To kill with magic was one thing, but to subdue required tricks and skills beyond mere power. It looked like he would have to pay more attention to the elder Potter. Dumbledore had thought he knew enough about Harry, but today's events showed how much he had underestimated the young man. Harry could sense Dumbledore's wheels turning, formulating new plans and strategies. But Harry was not concerned. He was not someone who could be controlled or directed now. If Dumbledore tried anything untoward, Harry knew he had the means to send the old wizard on to his next great adventure. He already had an easy way for that, involving a certain cursed ring hidden in a ruined shack. As Harry led the horntail away, the crowd parted before them, a mixture of awe and fear on their faces. Students whispered excitedly, already embellishing the tale of Harry's battle with the dragon. As Harry disappeared into the Forbidden Forest with his new draconic ally, he couldn't help but smile. The Triwizard Tournament had only just begun, and he might have already scared away his fellow champions. They were competing with someone who had subdued a dragon. Chapter 239, Aftermath and the Golden Egg. After escorting the now calm horntail to the dragon enclosure in the Forbidden Forest, Harry found himself whisked away by a concerned Professor Flitwick. Professor Flitwick, his face edged with concern, insisted on a quick checkup for his prized apprentice. As they made their way through the castle, Flitwick filled Harry in on the aftermath of the dragon's rampage. Your actions in escorting away the horntail undoubtedly prevented a catastrophe, Harry, he said, his voice tinged with both pride and worry. However, the initial destruction caused by the dragon, coupled with the panicked stampede of fleeing students, has resulted in numerous injuries among the spectators from all three schools. Harry's brow furrowed with concern. How bad is it, Professor? Flitwick sighed, his normally cheerful demeanor subdued. Thankfully, there are no severe injuries. But the sheer number of minor wounds and magical mishaps necessitated the conversion of the Great Hall into a temporary infirmary. Madame Pomfrey has her hands full, I can tell you that much. As they walked, Flitwick couldn't contain his excitement about Harry's performance in the first task. Your performance in the first task was simply astounding, Harry. The level of transfiguration you displayed, even Minerva was shocked. She confided in me that she might not have been able to pull off such a feat herself. Harry smiled modestly. Thank you, Professor. I've been studying independently. And it shows. Flitwick exclaimed. To think you've come this far without a dedicated transfiguration master, it's truly remarkable. And as for your handling of the escaped dragon, he lowered his voice conspiratorially, while surprising, I must admit I expected nothing less. I never doubted you could best a single dragon, no matter how fearsome. Curiosity got the better of the charms, Professor. How did you manage to subdue it, if I may ask? Harry decided to give a partial truth. After a rather intense battle, I discovered that dragons can understand Parseltongue. We had a, let's call it a heart-to-heart conversation. Flitwick's eyes widened. Fascinating. That's not common knowledge at all. The implications for dragon research. Their conversation took a more serious turn as Harry broached the subject of the dragon's escape. Flitwick's expression darkened. Alastor believes someone tampered with the restraints, possibly to endanger you specifically. He suspects Karkaroff, given his background and Crumb being your main competition, but there's no evidence. Dumbledore's asked Moody to investigate, but... He trailed off, shaking his head. To the outside world, it's being portrayed as an unfortunate accident. The headmaster is concerned about further damage to the school's reputation. As they entered the Great Hall, Harry was struck by the transformation. The usual house tables had vanished, replaced by rows upon rows of hospital beds. Healers in lime green robes darted between patients, their wands flashing as they tended to various injuries. The air was thick with the smell of medicinal potions and the low murmur of worried conversations. No sooner had Harry stepped into the hall than he found himself surrounded by a crowd of grateful students and spectators. Their voices overlapped in a cacophony of thanks and praise. "Potter! You saved our lives out there! That was incredible magic, Harry! How did you manage to tame that dragon?" Before Harry could respond, Madame Pomfrey appeared, parting the crowd with the efficiency of a seasoned healer. "Out of the way, all of you! Mr. Potter needs to be examined." She ushered Harry into the antechamber behind the staff table, leaving Professor Flitwick to manage the excited crowd. In the relative quiet of the antechamber, Madame Pomfrey conducted a thorough examination. Her wand moved in intricate patterns as she cast diagnostic spells, her frown deepening with each passing moment. "Remarkable," she muttered, more to herself than to Harry. "Barely a scratch on you. In all my years, I've never seen anyone come out of a dragon encounter so unscathed." She fixed Harry with a piercing look, curiosity warring with professional discretion. After a moment, she seemed to come to a decision. "Well, Mr. Potter, you seem to be suffering from nothing more than mild exhaustion. A pepper-up potion should set you right." As she handed him the steaming potion, Madame Pomfrey allowed herself a small smile. "Whatever you did out there, it was extraordinary. But do try to avoid any more death-defying stunts, if you can help it. I have quite enough on my plate as it is." Harry had barely downed the potion when the door burst open, admitting a flood of his friends. Cedric, Roger, Reggie, Elvinia, Arabella, Angelina, and Alicia poured into the room, their faces a mixture of relief and excitement. "Harry!" Cedric exclaimed, clapping him on the shoulder. "You absolute madman! Taking on a dragon like that!" Elvinia raised an eyebrow, her Slytherin cool barely masking her concern. "We were worried sick, you know. Next time you decide to play Dragon Rider, give us a heads up, will you?" As his friends settled around him, peppering him with questions, Harry noticed a small beetle perched on the windowsill. With a casual wave of his hand, he sent a silent banishing charm its way, smirking as Rita Skeeter's animagus form was unceremoniously ejected from the castle. All right," Harry laughed, holding up his hands in mock surrender. "I'll tell you what happened, but I warn you, it's quite a tale." For the next hour, Harry regaled his friends with an abridged version of his aerial duel with the Horntail. He omitted certain details, like his wandless magic and the full extent of his physical abilities, but the story was thrilling nonetheless. His friends listened with rapt attention, gasping and cheering at all the right moments. "Merlin's beard, Harry," Roger breathed when the tale was done. That's incredible. You've got to show us this dragon of yours." Harry's face fell slightly. "I'm afraid that's not possible. I overheard some handlers saying all the dragons are being transferred back to the reserve tonight. Can't risk another breakout, apparently." A collective groan of disappointment went up from the group. "Speaking of the task," Roger said, reaching into his bag, "I've got your golden egg here. Bagman said it contains a clue for the next task." Harry's eyes glinted with mischief. "Did he now? Well, why don't you open it and see what we've got?" As Roger reached for the egg, Harry casually conjured a pair of earmuffs and slipped them on. Elvinia, ever observant, narrowed her eyes. "Why are you wearing those, Harry?" "Oh, you know," Harry said innocently, "my ears are feeling a bit cold. Must be all that high-altitude flying." His friends exchanged skeptical glances but turned their attention back to Roger as he found the groove in the golden egg and twisted it open. The moment the egg cracked open, an ear-splitting screech filled the room. It was like nothing they had ever heard before, a horrible, loud wailing that set their teeth on edge and made their hair stand on end. "Shut it!" Angelina bellowed, her hands clamped over her ears. Roger slammed the egg closed, silence falling once more. "What in Merlin's name was that?" Cedric asked, wide-eyed. Elvinia rounded on Harry, who was struggling to contain his laughter. "You knew, didn't you?" Harry's attempts at innocence fell flat in the face of his friend's knowing looks. "Sounded like a banshee," Alicia mused. "Maybe that's your next challenge, Harry." Reggie, ever the Ravenclaw, stroked his chin thoughtfully. "I've read about this sound somewhere. Give me some time with the library, and I'll crack it." "Isn't Harry supposed to solve the clue himself?" Cedric pointed out. "Oh, I'm not helping Harry," Reggie countered. This is purely to satisfy my own curiosity. You know how we Ravenclaws are. Elvinia chimed in, Slytherins are curious too, dear brother. I'll assist in your research. One by one, each friend found a reason to join the investigation, their eagerness to help evident. Harry smiled, knowing the answer but content to let them enjoy the challenge. As curfew approached, the group dispersed. Harry, feeling rejuvenated, headed back to Ravenclaw Tower with Roger and Reggie. To their surprise, a celebration awaited them in the common room. The day's danger hadn't dampened the Ravenclaw spirits. Amid the festivities, someone inevitably asked about the golden egg. With a mischievous glint in his eye, Harry agreed to open it once more. This time, he, Roger, and Reggie donned earmuffs before dramatically revealing the egg's contents to their unsuspecting housemates. The resulting chaos of screeches and startled Ravenclaws was, in Harry's opinion, the perfect end to an extraordinary day. Chapter 240, The Aftermath and the Yule Ball Dilemma. The day after the first task, Hogwarts awoke to a flurry of excitement. As students filed into the Great Hall for breakfast, many were surprised to see it restored to its usual state. The rows of hospital beds that had filled the hall just yesterday were gone, replaced once again by the familiar house tables. Such was the efficiency of magical healing that most of the injured had already fully recovered and returned to their normal routines. Only a handful of students who required more extensive treatment remained in the hospital wing under Madame Pomfrey's watchful care. Owls swooped into the Great Hall during breakfast, dropping copies of the Daily Prophet into eager hands. As students unfurled their newspapers, a collective gasp rippled through the hall. Harry, seated at the Ravenclaw table, raised an eyebrow as he perused the front page. The task itself had been relegated to a small section, briefly outlining the champions' performances and scores. What dominated the paper, however, was a sensationalized account of the dragon's escape and the ensuing chaos. Dragon disaster at Hogwarts. Triwizard Tournament marred by near catastrophe. In a shocking turn of events, what should have been a showcase of magical prowess nearly ended in tragedy yesterday at Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. The first task of the Triwizard Tournament, involving the retrieval of a golden egg from a nesting dragon, spiraled into chaos when one of the dragons, a Hungarian horntail, broke free from its restraints. Eyewitnesses report scenes of utter pandemonium as the dragon rampaged through the arena, breathing fire and causing widespread panic among spectators. Even more alarmingly, sources close to the event claim that the esteemed Hogwarts staff, including Headmaster Albus Dumbledore, seemed momentarily powerless to subdue the beast. "It was terrifying," said one student, who wished to remain anonymous. "We thought we were going to die. The professors just stood there, wands out, but not doing anything." The situation was only brought under control when Hogwarts champion Hadrian Potter reportedly led the dragon away from the crowds. While details of how he managed this feat remain unclear, it undoubtedly prevented what could have been a catastrophic loss of life. This incident raises serious questions about the safety measures in place for the Triwizard Tournament. How could a dragon, one of the most dangerous magical creatures known to wizardkind, be allowed to escape its confines? Who is responsible for this lapse in security? The Ministry of Magic has yet to release an official statement on the matter, but sources suggest that an investigation is underway. As for Hogwarts itself, one can't help but wonder, is the once revered institution still the safest place in Britain? The coming days will undoubtedly bring more revelations about this near tragedy. The Daily Prophet pledges to keep our readers informed of all developments in this unfolding story. The article was pretty normal from what Harry knew about Skeeter, but still did not skip out any details and had her light touch to create controversy. Maybe the editors at the Prophet had to tone her writing down to ensure they did not get hate from Dumbledore and the Ministry. Harry couldn't help but smirk at Rita Skeeter's restraint in writing about him. He knew his threat regarding her unregistered animagus status had hit home. Still, the article was causing quite a stir among the students. "Can you believe this?" Roger exclaimed, gesturing wildly with his copy of the Prophet. "They're making it sound like we were all about to be roasted alive." Cedric, who had wandered over from the Hufflepuff table, nodded grimly. "It's not entirely inaccurate, though, is it? That dragon was definitely out of control." As the days passed, Rita Skeeter's articles continued to dominate the wizarding news cycle. Each day brought new revelations about past incidents at Hogwarts, from the opening of the Chamber of Secrets to the presence of a wanted criminal on the grounds the previous year. While she never directly accused Dumbledore, the implication was clear: Hogwarts was no longer the safe haven it once was. Just as the furor over the tournament began to die down, Rita's quill found a new target: Charles Potter's love life. Harry couldn't help but feel a twinge of pity for his younger brother as he read the latest headline. Heartache at Hogwarts. Boy who lived caught in love triangle drama. In a shocking twist, it seems young Charles Potter's heart is being torn between two witches. Sources close to the boy who lived reveal that while he harbors deep feelings for his childhood sweetheart, Ginny Weasley, his close friendship with brilliant Muggle-born witch Hermione Granger has blossomed into something more. Charles is absolutely smitten with Hermione, confides a Gryffindor housemate. But he feels obligated to Ginny. It's tearing him apart. The article caused an uproar, particularly among the Weasley family. Molly Weasley, incensed by the perceived threat to her daughter's happiness, sent a rather nasty letter to Hermione. It was only through Lily Potter's intervention that the situation didn't escalate further. Harry, for his part, chose to stay out of the drama. He had enough on his plate without getting involved in his brother's love life. Besides, Hermione had made herself somewhat unpopular this year with her misguided SPEW campaign. Harry saw no reason to draw unnecessary attention to himself by defending her. As December rolled in, bringing with it a blanket of snow and a chill in the air, a new challenge presented itself. After a particularly engaging charms class, Professor Flitwick made an announcement that sent ripples of excitement through the students. Attention, everyone! Flitwick's squeaky voice rang out. As is tradition with the Triwizard Tournament, Hogwarts will be hosting a Yule Ball on Christmas night. All students 4th year and above are invited to attend. Dress robes will be worn, and the ball will start at 8 o'clock, ending at midnight. As excited chatter broke out among the students, Flitwick added, and Mr. Potter, as one of our champions, you will be expected to open the ball with the first dance. Harry felt a knot form in his stomach. Dancing? In front of the entire school? He'd faced down a dragon with less trepidation than he felt at this moment. As the students filed out of the classroom, discussing potential dates and dress robes, Harry hung back. Professor, he began, is there any way I could, not attend? Perhaps go home for the holidays instead. Flitwick's expression was sympathetic but firm. I'm afraid not, Mr. Potter. It's tradition for the champions to open the ball. Your participation is mandatory. With a resigned sigh, Harry nodded and left the classroom, his mind whirling. He now faced two significant challenges, finding a date and learning how to dance. In his pursuit of power and training for future battles, Harry had completely distanced himself from relationships. He wasn't against the idea, but he had never wanted to distract himself or put a target on a potential partner's back. Now, he found himself in the awkward position of having to choose a partner for the ball and arrange dance lessons to avoid embarrassing himself in front of everyone. Harry went through all the potential candidates in his mind, but he could never settle on a choice. He found Fleur attractive, but their current rivalry ruled her out. He knew he couldn't take the decision lightly, girls took these events seriously, and he didn't want to ruin anyone's special night with a hasty choice. Over the next few days, Harry watched as his friends paired off one by one. Cedric asked Cho Chang, while Reginald shyly approached Arabella. The Weasley twins, in their typical exuberant fashion, secured Angelina and Alicia as their dates. Even timid Neville had worked up the courage to ask Susan. Harry received several invitations himself, but he politely declined them all. The idea of going to the ball with someone he didn't know well made him uncomfortable. Even Harry's friends who had initially been in the same boat as him managed to secure dates. In a surprising turn of events, both Roger and Elvinia had paired up with students from Beaux Batons, adding an international flair to their ball preparations. As the days ticked by and Harry remained dateless, he began to feel the pressure mounting. Students whispered in the corridors, wondering who the Hogwarts champion would take to the ball. Some even started a betting pool. Harry knew he needed to make a decision soon, but the right choice still eluded him. As he pondered his options, he couldn't help but wonder how this seemingly trivial matter had become such a daunting challenge. The dragon he had faced in the first task now seemed like a walk in the park compared to the social minefield of the Yule Ball. With a sigh, Harry resolved to redouble his efforts to find a suitable date. After all, he had faced worse odds before. Surely finding a dance partner couldn't be harder than battling a Hungarian horntail, could it?
Thanks for listening.